A missing teenager. A secret canal. A smuggling route hidden in plain sight. Shadow route. Chapter 1. Donnie Frears hadn't called ahead. That was the first thing wrong. Donnie called ahead for everything. Charter bookings, dentist appointments, dinner at a friend's house. It was a Navy thing, he told Mike once. The habit of announcing your position before you moved into someone else's space. 22 years on ships had built it into him, and nothing in civilian life had shaken it loose. So when Mike came off the beach at 6:40 with the metal detector over his shoulder and saw Donnie's truck in the marina lot, the white F-250 with the Port Salerno Charter's magnetic signs on the doors, and the trailer hitch rusted from 15 years of salt air, he set the detector against the truck's bumper and didn't say hello first. "What happened?" Mike said. Donnie was sitting on the tailgate. He'd lost weight since Mike had seen him last, 8 months ago. A backyard cookout at somebody's house in Stewart that Mike had driven to, and back in the same evening, because it was easier than explaining why he didn't stay. Donnie was 51 with a face that the sun had treated like a project. Deep lines around the eyes, the back of his neck permanently red-brown, the build of a man who'd spent 30 years hauling gear and fighting ocean weather and had kept the useful parts of that. He handed Mike a document without speaking. It was a dia impound notice. The Sally Mae, Donnie's 28-foot contender, had been seized at Port Salerno Marina on a probable cause warrant issued out of the Southern District of Florida. Date of seizure, 4 days ago. Basis: a tip alleging the vessel was used to transfer a controlled substance package from a foreign freighter anchored in federal waters approximately 3 miles offshore. Mike read it twice. The language was clean, the warrant properly formatted, the probable cause affidavit attached, and detailed enough to have satisfied a judge who wasn't looking for reasons to say no. They searched the boat, Mike said. Top to bottom. 6 hours. Donnie looked at his hands. Nothing. Because there's nothing to find. They release it? No. Donnie's jaw set. Evidence hold, pending further investigation. Which means I can't touch the boat, can't run my charters, can't make this Friday's payment on the slip rental or the insurance or any of the rest of it. He looked up. 3 charters booked this week. $800 apiece. I called them all this morning. Mike handed the warrant back. Where were you the night they say it happened? Tied up at my slip. All night. I had a 6 a.m. charter the next morning. I don't go out the night before. I sleep on the boat if it's an early one. I was there from 8 p.m. to 6:15 a.m., and I can prove every hour of it. How? Bobby Nash runs security cameras at Port Salerno. 8 cameras, full lot coverage, dock included. My slip's on camera 6. I'm in frame all night. He folded the warrant, put it in his shirt pocket. I told the DIA agent that. He wrote it down. Said he'd follow up. How long ago? 4 days. Mike looked at the marina behind Donnie, at the inlet running its morning business, at Earl's office trailer with the light on inside, meaning Earl was already in there doing the thing Earl did in the morning, which was drink bad coffee and pretend to do paperwork. Come on, Mike said. Earl read the warrant over his coffee without commenting on it until he'd finished reading it, which was Earl's method with most things, full information before any response. Clean paper, Earl said. Too clean, Mike said. It's formatted right, sourced right, the affidavit covers what it needs to cover. But probable cause on a drug transfer this specific usually comes from surveillance, not a tip. Surveillance would show the boat either went out or didn't. A tip can be anything. Anonymous? Has to be. There's no C designation, no source reference. Just a maritime crime tip line submission. Mike turned the affidavit over, checked the back. Tip came in 48 hours after the supposed transfer. 2 days to sit on it before the warrant. Why sit on it? Because if you're building a frame, You wait long enough that the framing event is in the past before the response begins. Makes it harder to establish a clean timeline of where the boat actually was. Mike set the affidavit on Earl's desk. Donnie. The night in question. You said you were aboard. Was anybody else? No. Solo. Any reason somebody would want your boat specifically? Donnie looked at the trailer park decal on Earl's window. The kind of unfocused look of someone running through everything they know and checking it against a question that hadn't occurred to them. I run the southern routes mostly. Down toward Hope Sound, sometimes the St. Lucie Inlet, occasionally up the canal toward Fellsmere when I've got nature tour clients who want the inland waterway experience. He paused. I don't know why my boat specifically. I'm one of 30 charter operators out of Port Salerno. But you run the canals, Mike said. The inland routes. Sometimes. It's a niche thing. Not many operators do it. The draft requirements are tight on some of those canal arms. He looked at Mike. You think it's about the route? I don't think anything yet, Mike said, which was true, and also the most useful thing he could tell Donnie at this stage, because thinking too hard about a frame before you'd seen the physical evidence was how you built a theory that didn't fit the facts instead of following the facts to the theory. Earl poured Donnie a coffee without asking, which was Earl's version of welcome, and Donnie took it with both hands, the way people took coffee when they needed something warm to hold on to. Couch is yours, Mike said. As long as you need it. Donnie looked at him. Your couch is a love seat. It is. I didn't say it was a good couch. Port Salerno Marina sat at the south end of a channel that connected to the St. Lucie River, a working operation that had survived several rounds of redevelopment pressure by being useful enough that the people trying to redevelop it kept running into the problem that the people who actually used the water needed it to be exactly what it was. Bobby Nash had been harbormaster for 16 years, a compact black man of 60 with reading glasses he kept on top of his head and only remembered to push down when he was actively reading, which created the impression that he was always slightly surprised by documents. Mike found him in the harbormaster's shack at 9, sorting slip rental receipts into a system that appeared to involve 3 separate piles and a logic known only to Bobby. Donnie Frears, Mike said. Bobby pushed the glasses down. Hell of a thing. Donnie's straight as they come. He said it flatly, as a fact, the kind of declarative that didn't require supporting evidence because 16 years of watching boats come and go had given him a calibration he trusted. Dia tell you they were coming? Day of. Showed the warrant. I unlocked the slipgate, stood there while they worked the boat. 6 hours. Bobby pulled a folder from the middle pile, with the precision of someone who knew exactly where things were, in a system that looked like chaos. I pulled camera footage, same day. Didn't wait for them to ask. He turned a laptop on the desk toward Mike. The footage was already cued, camera 6. The angle showing Donnie's slip, the Sally Mae tied up and motionless from 8:03 p.m. to 6:14 a.m., Donnie visible twice, once checking a line before midnight and once making coffee on the aft deck at 5:40. They look at this. Mike said. DIA agent Harris came by yesterday. Reviewed it. Copied the files. Bobby took the laptop back. He said it complicated the picture, which is Fed speak for the tip, and the evidence aren't agreeing with each other. The other boat, Mike said. Night of the supposed transfer. Anything unusual? Bobby didn't answer right away. He went to the second pile, pulled a different folder. Printout of the marina's nightly log. Every vessel entering or leaving the slip area, times recorded by the automated gate system. Center console, Bobby said. Came in at 9:47 p.m., logged out at 1:53 a.m. 4 hours and change. He pointed to the entry. Registration runs to a company called Southern Marine Holdings, LLC. Florida registration? Delaware. Bobby looked at him over the reading glasses. I called the registration number on the plate. Phone goes to a voicemail for something called Atlantic Charter Services. I left a message. He paused. That was 3 days ago. Nobody called back. Nobody called back. Bobby closed the folder. I know most of the regulars. Some faces I don't know the name to, some I know both. This boat I'd never seen before that night, and I haven't seen it since. Center console, maybe 24 feet, dark hull. The 2 men on it wore hats and kept their heads down when they passed the camera, which people who aren't doing anything don't typically bother to do. Who uses this marina routinely? Out of the south end, the canal routes. Bobby considered that. 3 or 4 operators run the inland routes. Donnie's one. Ted Kowalski does nature tours. He's retired, runs maybe twice a week. A woman named Patrice, who does sunset charters, occasionally takes clients up the Fellsmere Canal if they want something scenic. He paused. And a seasonal operation. Came in about 4 months ago, rented a slip month to month, flat-bottom commercial configuration. 2 men, paid cash for the slip, filed the right paperwork, never gave me a reason to ask questions. He looked at Mike. Until right now. Still here. Slip 12. Boat's been gone the last 5 days. Bobby closed the log. I'll show you the slip. They walked the dock together, Bobby with his hands in his jacket pockets. The morning salt air doing what November salt air did, making everything feel cleaner than it was. Slip 12 sat empty, the dock lines hanging loose on their cleats, a faint oil sheen on the water alongside that told Mike the flat bottom had been here recently, and recently meant days rather than weeks. A detail on the dock piling caught him. A plastic zip tie, the kind used to secure equipment bundles, cut clean rather than removed by unscrewing. Whatever had been tied to the piling had been cut off in a hurry. He photographed it with his phone. Photographed the slip, the oil sheen, the dock lines. When did they leave? Mike said. 5 days ago. Night departure, which I'd normally note as unusual, but they'd done 1 or 2 before, and I had no reason to log it as anything specific. Bobby looked at the empty slip. They come back, I call you before I call anyone else. Call Jennings, Mike said. Detective Jennings, Colusa KPD. Call her first, then call me. Bobby stored the number in his phone, with the deliberateness of someone who did things right the first time, because doing them wrong required a second time he'd rather not spend. Walking back up the dock, Mike's phone buzzed. Unknown, local number. He answered. You're asking about Donnie Frears. A man's voice, flat, without particular inflection, the tone of someone who'd rehearsed neutral. Asking around Port Salerno. Talking to the harbor master. Mike stopped walking. Bobby looked at him, read whatever was on his face, and walked on ahead without being asked. Who's this? Mike said. Somebody who wants you to understand that what you're looking into is bigger than a charter boat captain's problem, and that smart people who understand that tend to walk away from it. And smart people who don't understand it. A pause. They tend to complicate their situation. That's a threat, Mike said. Most people delivering threats introduce themselves. It's good manners. Nothing on the line for 3 seconds, the breathing sound of someone deciding something. Then walk away from the impound. Let it run its course. What course is that? But the line was already dead. Mike stood at the dock's landward end and looked at the marina. The boats at their slips, the morning fishermen loading gear, Bobby Nash walking back to his shack with the unhurried step of a man who'd learned that marinas ran on their own clock and there was no improving on it. Somebody in this marina, or watching this marina, had known Mike was here within the time it took him to walk from the harbor master's shack to slip 12 and back. He looked at the boats. At the dock. At the lot beyond the gate where 5 or 6 vehicles were parked, any one of which could hold a man with a phone and a view of the dock. The call had been made from a local number, which meant either someone here or someone close enough to be watching in real time. He went back to his truck without hurrying, without looking at the lot any harder than a man looking at a parking lot looked at a parking lot, and sat inside with the engine off and his phone on his knee. Donnie hadn't been framed by amateurs. Amateurs built frames that fell apart on Bobby Nash's camera footage. This frame was built to survive the camera footage, built on a tip that created the investigation, not on evidence that proved the crime, which meant whoever built it expected the investigation to have a life of its own, independent of whether Donnie was actually guilty. A professional frame served two purposes. It occupied the subject's attention and resources, and it created a paper record of official scrutiny on a specific location, in this case, Donnie's route, the Southern Canal system, the inland waterways west of Port Salerno. The flat bottom in slip 12. The center console that had come in at 9:47 and left at 1:53. Not a drug operation. Something else moving through the same water. He started the truck, drove west on State Road 512 because west was where the canal routes went, and west was also, he realized as he drove, where a roadside lunch counter sat that he'd been meaning to stop at for 3 years, run by a woman who'd fed him without asking why he needed feeding in the first week he'd arrived in this state with a history that had reduced itself to $38 and a duffel bag. He should have gone sooner. He went now. Chapter 2. State Road 512 ran west from the coast through the specific Florida geography that tourists never saw because it didn't have beaches or shopping, scrub oak and palmetto giving way to cattle pasture giving way to the first citrus groves, the flat agricultural interior asserting itself with the quiet authority of land that had been producing things for 100 years and didn't need anyone's approval to keep doing it. Mike drove with the windows down because the truck's air conditioning had developed opinions about when it wanted to work, and 11 in the morning wasn't one of them. The air coming in was different from the beach air, drier with the faint sweetness of ripening citrus underneath the diesel smell from the truck in front of him hauling grove equipment on a flatbed. Rose's place showed up at mile marker 14, a low concrete block building painted the yellow of old mustard, a hand-lettered sign above the door, Rose's coffee lunch bait. The last word was there because a bait cooler sat beside the door, full of night crawlers and artificial lures for the canal fishermen who stopped on the way in and on the way out. The parking lot held 4 trucks and a sedan with a cracked windshield. He'd driven past this place 11 times in 3 years. The first time he'd stopped, the week he arrived in Florida, he'd been running on empty in every sense the phrase applied to, and Rosa had handed him a plate of eggs and black beans and rice without being asked to, and had charged him $3, which was not what it cost, and both of them knew it, and neither of them acknowledged it, which was the specific grace of a transaction conducted by 2 people who understood each other's dignity without discussing it. He pushed through the door, into the smell of coffee and sofrito, and the sound of a radio playing something with brass. The counter had 6 stools, 4 of them occupied by men in work clothes eating without urgency. A pass-through to the kitchen showed the back of a woman moving between a griddle and a prep surface, efficient, no wasted motion. Sit anywhere. The voice came from the kitchen. She hadn't looked up. Mike sat at the end stool, the one closest to the door. Force of habit. Rosa Medina came through the pass-through 2 minutes later with 2 plates for the men at the middle of the counter, and set them down, and turned and saw Mike, and did what people did when they saw someone they knew in a context they hadn't expected. A half-second of recalibration before the recognition settled. "Michael Ramble," she said. "Rosa. You finally came." She said it without accusation, just acknowledgement, the same tone she'd probably used to note that the rain had finally arrived. "Should have come sooner." "Yes." She poured coffee without asking, the heavy diner mug black, and set it down. You're not here for the eggs. I'd take the eggs, Mike said. But no. I need to ask you something. She looked at him for a moment. 42 years old, dark hair pulled back in the way of someone who'd been working since before 5 and would be working past 8. The face of a woman who had not had an easy decade and had not let the not easiness become the main thing about her. Then she went back through the pass-through, and he heard the griddle sound, and she came back out in 4 minutes with eggs, black beans, rice, 2 pieces of toast. Ask, she said. Your daughter, Anna. Rose's hands went still on the counter. She's missing, Mike said. Not a question. He'd known from the way Rose's face had moved when he said Anna's name. The specific compression of someone who'd been holding a fear in one place for days and suddenly had to hold it in front of a person. 4 days, Rosa said. I filed a report with the sheriff's office Tuesday morning. She looked at the counter, at her own hands on it. Tuesday morning, she was supposed to catch the bus on 512 at 7:15. She never got on. The bus driver didn't see her at the stop. They following up. A deputy came to take the report. He was polite. He wrote down everything. She looked up. He hasn't called. Mike ate a forkful of eggs to give her a moment. The eggs were good, scrambled with something, peppers maybe, the kind of detail that came from cooking the same thing for 20 years and having developed specific opinions about it. Tell me about Anna, he said. Not what happened. Her. Who she is. Rose's expression shifted, the relief of being asked a question with a true answer rather than a frightening one. She's 17. She'll be 18 in March. Very good student. Her grades earned her 2 applications to Florida Atlantic that I didn't have to push her for. She wants to study environmental science. A brief pause. She works 2 mornings a week here, Tuesdays and Saturdays. She has a boyfriend, Luis Barrera. He works the citrus harvest. He's a good young man. He's been out of his mind the last 4 days. Luis knows something. He told the deputy that Anna had mentioned seeing something at the Groves the week before she disappeared. Something that bothered her. Rose's jaw tightened. The deputy wrote it down. What did she see? Luis told me she saw a delivery at the Tallman Grove. Late at night, she was coming back from Luis's, the long road, the one that cuts through the south end of the grove. She saw a truck and men unloading. She paused. She said the cases they were unloading didn't look like anything she'd seen at a grove before. Cases, Mike said. Metal, she told Luis. With foam inside, she could see when they opened one. Rosa looked at him. She photographed them. On her phone. Mike set his fork down. She sent the photographs to Luis, Rosa said. Before she disappeared. Luis still have them? He says yes. She looked at her hands again. He's scared. I think he's been scared since Tuesday. And he's been sitting on the photographs because he doesn't know what to do with them, and he doesn't want to make it worse. Where is he now? The labor camp at the Tallman Grove. He's staying there during harvest season. She wrote the address on a paper napkin from the dispenser, the address and Luis's phone number. He works the early shift. He'll be done by 2. Mike took the napkin. Rosa. The sheriff's report. Can I get a copy? I have one. She went to the back and came back with a folded paper. He read it while he finished the coffee. The deputy had been thorough enough with the factual information. Anna's description, the bus stop location, the time, Luis's name, and what Luis had said about the Grove delivery. Thorough with the facts. Thin on the follow-up plan. The report had the quality of a document filed in the expectation that a 17-year-old who'd never run before would turn up in 2 or 3 days with an explanation that made the report unnecessary. You think she ran, Mike said. The deputy. He was kind about it. He explained that most missing teenagers, she stopped. Anna didn't run. She has 2 applications to Florida Atlantic and a mother who makes her eggs on Tuesday morning. She didn't run. No, Mike said. She didn't. He paid for the eggs. More than they cost. The same math as the first time, but in the other direction now. A man with more than $38 settling a debt that had never been presented as one. I'm going to find her, he said. Rosa looked at him. You don't know that. No. But I'm going to go look for her with everything I have, which is what I can tell you honestly. Rosa nodded. The nod of a woman who'd learned the difference between promises and intentions and found she could work with an honest intention when she had to. He sat in the parking lot with the sheriff's report, and the napkin with Luis's number, and the truck engine ticking as it cooled, running both problems in his head simultaneously, because both problems were in his head whether he wanted them there or not. The flat bottom in slip 12. Metal cases with foam lining being unloaded at the Tallman Grove's south end at night. A 17-year-old who photographed them and disappeared 4 days later. A charter captain framed on a drug charge to create a paper investigation on the Canal route that ran from Port Salerno inland to the Tallman Grove's water access. Not 2 problems. 1 problem wearing 2 faces. He texted Donnie, the canal route you run for nature tours. The Fellsmere Arm. Has it gone anywhere near the Tallman Grove? Donnie's response came back in 3 minutes. Tallman's south boundary has a dock on the canal. I've gone past it plenty. Maybe 3 weeks ago. I was up that way with a group of birders. Why? Mike didn't answer the why yet. Instead, he called Bobby Nash. The flat bottom in slip 12, Mike said. The 4 months they were here. What kind of trips did they make? Night runs mostly. A regular schedule, maybe twice a week, sometimes less. Gone 4 or 5 hours at a stretch. Bobby paused. They told me they were running survey work on the canal system. Water quality monitoring for an agricultural client. You believe that? I believed it enough not to ask more questions, which is different. Bobby paused. They had equipment aboard that was consistent with it. Cases, instruments, the kind of gear you'd take on a waterway survey. Never gave me a reason to look harder. Metal cases. Foam lining. The kind of cases you'd used to protect precision equipment on a survey boat. Or the kind of cases you'd use for something else entirely. And tell the harbormaster was survey equipment, counting on the visual similarity to shut down further questions. Bobby. The night the center console came in, the one that logged out at 1:53 a.m. Did the flat bottom also go out that night? A long pause while Bobby checked something. Slip 12 logged out at 9:22 p.m. Logged back in at 2:41 a.m. Both boats out the same night. The center console and the flat bottom, operating in the same window, one coming from the direction of the offshore freighter anchorage and one going inland. They were the same operation, Mike said. Center console ran the offshore transfer. Flat bottom moved the cargo inland through the canal. Donnie's route was the decoy. Frame a legitimate boat running the same canals, so there's a documented DIA investigation on the waterway. Any future inquiry into why boats were moving through there at night gets pointed at the Donnie investigation. God Almighty, Bobby said. Don't tell anyone else what you've told me. Don't call DIA about the flat bottom, I'll get that to Harris. If the flat bottom comes back, you call Jennings. He called Jennings next. She picked up on the second ring, as always. I need you to run a company, he said. Southern Marine Holdings, LLC. Delaware registration. It's the owner of record, on a center console, that was present at Port Salerno Marina the night Donnie was supposedly running drugs. The same night a flat bottom from the same marina ran a canal route inland to a Grove property where a teenage girl was photographed something she shouldn't have photographed and has been missing for 4 days. Jennings wrote without interrupting. The girl's name is Anna Medina. Her mother runs a lunch counter on 512. The sheriff's office has a report. It's been 4 days, no follow-up. Anna's boyfriend at the Tallman Grove labor camp has photographs she sent him from her phone before she disappeared. I'm going to see him this afternoon. I'll run the LLC and call the sheriff's office about the missing persons report, Jennings said. What do you need from me on the Donnie situation? Harris at DIA already has the harbor camera footage. He knows the frame doesn't hold. What he doesn't have yet is the connection between the impound and a missing teenager and a canal-based cargo operation that's been running out of Port Salerno for 4 months. I'll talk to Harris directly. I just need you to know the shape of it in case Harris needs official county coordination. I'll be available, she said, which was her way of saying she'd stay close to her phone. Mike. The girl. 4 days is. I know, he said. He didn't say what he knew, because Jennings already knew it too, and saying it out loud didn't make it less true or more useful. He drove back east toward the marina to pick up Donnie, because he had 2 stops left today, and one of them was the DIA agent's field office in Stewart, and the other was a Citrus Grove labor camp west of Sebastian, and both of them would go better with Donnie present. Donnie had standing. A man whose boat had been impounded on a fraudulent charge had the right to be in the room for the conversation about why. And in the labor camp, Donnie's face was a face that had been up and down those canals for years, which was a kind of credential that mattered in places where strangers arriving alone got doors closed in their faces. He called Donnie as he turned back onto A1A. You said you were done by 2 at the canal when you had birders, Mike said. How far into the Tolman Grove's water access did you go? To the Grove's south dock. I turn around there usually. The canal gets shallow past that point at low tide. You ever see the dock being used? A pause. 3 weeks ago. When I was up there with the birders. Tell me. A flat bottom at the dock. 2 men unloading cases onto a cart. I didn't think much of it. Grove operations run at all hours during harvest. I figured it was equipment coming in off the waterway. Another pause. The cases had foam lining. I could see it from the canal when they had one open. Could you see the men's faces? One of them. The one working the dock side, not the boat side. Would you recognize him? The pause this time was longer. The kind that meant yes, and also meant the person knew that yes complicated things. Yeah, Donnie said. I'd recognize him. Mike looked at the road ahead. At the flat coastal plain running toward the coast, at the clear November sky doing nothing dramatic. Get in the truck, he said. We've got stops to make. Chapter 3. Tom Harris operated out of a field office in Stewart that shared a building with the county health department, which told Mike something about DEA's Stewart field budget without requiring any additional information. The office had a buzzer, a frosted glass door, and a waiting area with 2 chairs that suggested the waiting area's designers had been optimistic about the volume of voluntary visitors. Harris came out himself rather than sending anyone, which Mike took as a sign that Harris was either the only one in the office or had decided this conversation warranted personal handling. He was 38, lean in the economical way of someone who ran rather than lifted, with a close haircut and the specific watchful quality of a federal agent who'd learned that the most important thing in any conversation was the part the other person hadn't planned to say. He looked at Donnie first, then at Mike. You're Ramble, he said. I am. Bobby Nash called me this morning. Said you'd been by. Harris held the frosted door open. Come back. His office had one window, showing the health department's parking lot, and a desk with 3 stacks of folders and a laptop open to something he closed when they sat down. He pulled Donnie's impound file without being asked, and set it between them on the desk. The camera footage, Mike said. I've seen the camera footage. Harris leaned back. The Sally Mae is in frame all night. That's a problem for the warrant. The center console, Mike said. Southern Marine Holdings, LLC. Delaware registration. Harris' expression didn't change, but he picked up a pen and turned it over once in his fingers. Where'd you get that? Bobby Nash's slip log. The console was in the marina the same night as the alleged transfer. 4 hours. It logged in 40 minutes before the transfer window and out 90 minutes after. I haven't pulled the slip logs yet, Harris said. Bobby pulled them. He's thorough. Harris wrote something. Southern Marine Holdings. You run that? Just the name. Your databases are better than mine. Harris looked at him steadily, the look of a federal agent deciding how to categorize a civilian who'd arrived with information the federal agent didn't have yet. Mike had been on the receiving end of that look enough times, across enough careers, to know that the categorization was running between asset and complication, and that the determination depended on how the next 2 minutes went. What do you want from me? Harris said. I want you to know the frame before you spend 6 months building a case on a man who didn't do it, Mike said. The impound serves a purpose for whoever set it up. Keeping it running serves their purpose too. What purpose? Creating a documented DIA investigation on the Port Salerno Canal routes. So if anyone asks why boats were moving inland at night, there's a ready answer. DIA is already on it, it's Donnie Freers, it's being handled. Mike looked at the file between them. The frame doesn't need to stick. It just needs to run long enough to serve the cover story. Harris was quiet for a moment, the pen still in his hand. You're saying the impound is operational infrastructure for another operation. That's what I'm saying. What operation? That's what I'm working on. Separately from Donnie's situation. Mike paused. There's a missing girl. 17, from a Grove community west of Sebastian. She disappeared 4 days ago, after photographing a cargo delivery to the Tallman Grove's South Dock. Her boyfriend has the photographs. Harris set the pen down. The shift was small but real. A man who'd been conducting a drug investigation finding out it was something else. The specific internal recalibration of a federal agent whose case just grew a dimension. What kind of cargo? Harris said. I'll know more when I see the photographs. What Donnie saw at the same dock 3 weeks ago was consistent with what the girl described. Mike looked at Donnie, the handoff clear. Donnie told it straight. The birder charter, the canal, the south dock, the flat bottom, the foam-lined cases, the man on the dock whose face he'd seen at 20 yards in decent light. Harris listened without interrupting. When Donnie finished, Harris asked one question. Would you testify to what you saw? Under oath, in a federal proceeding. Yes, Donnie said without hesitating. Harris closed the impound file. I'm going to be honest with you, both. The probable cause on the warrant is weak. I knew that when I reviewed the tip. But a tip that specific with a detailed transfer description is hard to ignore without at least running the boat. He looked at Donnie. The camera footage and your testimony about where you were that night essentially voids the probable cause basis. I'm releasing the Sally Mae today. Donnie's shoulders came down an inch. The console registration and the slip logs go into a separate investigation that has nothing to do with your impound, Harris said to Donnie. Then to Mike, the girl. Missing persons is county. I don't have jurisdiction unless there's a federal nexus. There's going to be a federal nexus, Mike said. When I know what's in those photographs, I'll call you. Call me before you do anything with the photographs, Harris said. Not after. Before. I'll call you, Mike said, which was not the same commitment Harris had asked for, but was close enough that neither of them was going to make the distinction explicit. Luis Barrera wasn't at the labor camp when they arrived at 2:15. The camp sat off a county road with no name, a collection of converted agricultural buildings and a newer aluminum-sided structure that served as a common room, surrounded by orange grove on 3 sides and a drainage canal on the 4th. A cluster of men sat in plastic chairs outside the common room. 2 of them watched Mike's truck pull in with the attention of people who'd learned that unfamiliar vehicles arriving at their housing situation were rarely good news. Donnie got out first, because Donnie's face was known in these agricultural communities from years of running nature tours for the Grove owners' guests and the occasional birding charter. The dynamic in the plastic chairs shifted slightly, not friendly but less guarded. "Luis Barrera," Donnie said to the group. A man in his 30s pointed down a row of the converted buildings without speaking. They found Luis at the end of the row, sitting on the steps of the 3rd building, not doing anything. Sitting the way people sat when they'd been sitting in the same place for most of 4 days, movement having become difficult to initiate. He was 28 with the build of someone who worked physically, and the face of someone who hadn't slept. He looked at Mike's truck and at Mike and at Donnie, and didn't stand up, which wasn't unfriendly, just the inertia of a man whose capacity for normal social response had been eroded by 4 days of fear. "Luis," Donnie said. "This is Mike Ramble. He's looking for Anna." Luis looked at Mike for a long moment. "Rosa called me this morning. Said someone was coming." "The photographs," Mike said. "Anna sent them to you." Luis looked at his hands. "She said she was going to show them to someone. A teacher, maybe, or the county extension office, someone who'd know what the equipment was." He stopped. "I told her to wait. I told her not to show anyone yet until we figured out what we were looking at." He looked up. "She didn't listen. She never listened when she thought she was right." "When did she disappear?" "Tuesday morning. She texted me at 6:52, said she was walking to the bus stop. That's the last text." He pulled his phone from his pocket, navigated to the message thread, held it up. The last message from Anna's number read, "Walking to stop. See you tonight. Timestamp 6:52 a.m. Tuesday." "The photographs she sent you," Mike said. "I need to see them." Luis scrolled back in the thread. Further than Mike expected. The photographs had been sent 4 days before Anna disappeared, not the night she saw the delivery. She'd sat on them for 4 days before deciding to do something with them. He turned the phone so Mike could see. The photographs were phone quality and low light, which made them grainy. But Anna had been methodical. 6 photographs, taken from what looked like a gap in wooden planking, a fence or a shed wall. The camera angled down toward the interior of a structure where the delivery was happening. The first 3 showed the cases closed, stacked on a cart, 4 men visible at various distances, all wearing dark clothing. The 4th showed a case open, the foam interior visible, and inside it something that Mike looked at for 3 seconds before he understood what he was looking at. Electronic components. Specifically, rack-mounted units with displays and connection panels. The kind of precision hardware that didn't belong in a citrus grove. The 5th photograph showed a label on one of the closed cases, partially readable. Mike zoomed in on Donnie's phone, which had a better camera than his own, and squinted at the text. He could read 4 words before the resolution gave out: tactical and systems and export and controlled. The 6th photograph showed 2 of the 4 men's faces, caught when one of them stepped into a pool of light from an open door. Neither face meant anything to Mike. But the photograph was sharp enough to matter. He looked at Luis. "You understand what's in these photographs?" "Military equipment," Luis said. "Or something like it. I looked up some of the words online." He paused. "I looked up export controlled. I know what that means. It means moving this stuff without the right federal licenses is a federal crime," Mike said. "A serious one." Luis nodded slowly, the nod of someone confirming what they'd suspected, and found the confirmation worse than the suspicion. "The men in the last photograph," Mike said. "You recognize either of them?" "No." Mike showed the phone to Donnie. Donnie looked at the sixth photograph for 5 seconds. His jaw tightened. "The one on the left," Donnie said. "That's the man I saw at the south dock. On the flat bottom." Mike handed the phone back to Luis. "I need you to send me all 6 photographs. Right now, to my number." He gave Luis the number, watched him send them, confirmed receipt on his own phone. "Now send them to this number too." He gave Jennings's number. Luis sent them without asking why. "Who runs this camp?" Mike said. "The contracting operation. Man named Cobb. Eddie Cobb." Luis said the name the way people said the names of men they were afraid of, flat, without inflection, the voice of someone who'd learned that tone carried information to the wrong ears. "He know Anna's missing?" "He knows. He made an announcement the day after she disappeared. Said if anyone had information about the Medina girl, they should tell him directly, not go to the police." Luis looked at his hands again. "He said it was a community matter, and the police would just cause problems for everyone's paperwork. Anyone go to him with information?" "I don't know. Maybe." He looked at Mike. "Mr. Ramble, Cobb has a relationship with the men who use the South Dock. I don't know exactly what the relationship is, but I've seen his truck down at the south end late at night 3 times in the last 2 months. That road dead ends at the dock. There's nothing else down there." Mike stood. "You're going to need to talk to a detective named Jennings. She's county, she's straight, she's going to call you today. Answer the phone when she does." Luis nodded. "One more thing," Mike said. "Pack a bag. Not a big one. Enough for 3 or 4 days." He looked at the row of converted buildings, at the camp, at the open agricultural land around it. "Don't sleep here tonight." Luis looked up sharply. "Where?" "Rosa will find you somewhere. Call her when Jennings calls you." Mike met the young man's eyes. "You've been sitting on this alone for 4 days because you were scared, which is the right response to being scared. But alone stops working now. You understand?" Luis looked at the phone in his hands, at the photographs that were already sent to 2 other numbers and existed now in a space larger than just his. "I understand," he said. Back in the truck, Donnie sat with the photographs on Mike's phone, going back to the 6th one, to the face he'd recognized. "That's definitely him," Donnie said. "The dock, 3 weeks ago." "I believe you. What is this stuff?" "Really?" "Electronic warfare components, maybe. Signal equipment. The kind that requires federal export licensing because it has weapons applications." Mike started the truck. "Somebody's been running controlled defense technology through a citrus grove in the Indian River County interior, using a canal route to the coast, using a boat you've established as a regular presence on that route to create cover, and framing you when they needed the cover to look official." Donnie stared at the road. "All that. All that. Because I run birding tours up the canal. Because you're legitimate. A legitimate operator running the same route makes the route look normal. A DIA investigation on the same route makes it look investigated and therefore clear." Mike pulled out of the Grove Road onto the county road. "Your route was their operational infrastructure. They needed it to keep existing, which means they needed you to be available to run it, which means they didn't want you arrested, just investigated." "That's a hell of a thing to do to a man," Donnie said. "It is. And Anna saw the delivery. And photographed it," Mike said. "Which is what got her taken." Donnie was quiet for 2 miles. Then, "Mike, she's been gone 4 days." "I know. 4 days is." "I know," Mike said again, harder, because he did know, and Donnie saying it wasn't going to change the knowing or the timeline, only put it in the air between them where it would sit. He called Jennings from the county road, the grove running alongside on both sides, the rows of trees creating a parallel corridor in his peripheral vision. "The photographs," he said when she picked up. "You get them?" "Got them. Looking at them now." A pause. "Export-controlled components. Tactical systems hardware." Another pause. "Mike, this isn't a smuggling operation. This is an illegal arms export. Whoever's running this is moving controlled defense technology offshore without federal licensing." "Harris needs the photographs," Mike said. "Harris needs more than the photographs. This is beyond DEA's lane. This is State Department export violations, potentially DOD if the equipment is classified." She paused. "I'm calling a contact at the FBI field office in West Palm. I've worked with her before, she's solid." "Make the call," Mike said. "But Jennings, the girl is the priority. Whatever the cargo is, Anna Medina is somewhere in or around that grove, and every hour that passes—" "I know," Jennings said. "I'm working both simultaneously. Go find Cobb. Don't start something I can't finish." He hung up. The county road curved west, and the grove opened up briefly into a cleared section, and at the far end of the cleared section a double-wide sat behind a chain-link gate with a weathered sign, "Grove Operations, Authorized Personnel Only." A black pickup was parked nose out beside the double-wide. A man stood beside it talking on a phone, back to the road. Mike drove past at the speed limit, not slowing, not looking directly. He saw the man in peripheral vision. Heavy-set, middle 50s, a posture that suggested the phone call was not going well. "That Cobb?" Mike said. Donnie looked without turning his head. "Don't know him. But the truck was at the dock 3 weeks ago. That's the truck." Mike drove another quarter-mile before he said anything. "Call Rosa," he said. "Tell her Luis is coming tonight. Don't say anything else on the phone." Donnie was already dialing. Mike drove west because west was where the grove's south end was, and south was where the dock sat at the end of the road that dead-ended at the canal, and the canal connected to the coast. And somewhere along that connection, a 17-year-old girl who'd been right about what she saw and hadn't waited like Luis told her to was either being held or was already something Mike was going to have to tell Rosa about in a way that would cost both of them something permanent. He wasn't going to the dock yet. Not in daylight. Not with Cobb already on his phone with someone who was presumably updating someone else about the strangers who'd been asking questions at Port Salerno Marina that morning. But he drove the road to the dock's turnoff, just to see it, just to put his eyes on where it was and how it sat relative to the grove's other structures. A dirt road, unpaved, ran south from the county road through a section of grove that had been harvested recently, the trees stripped and quiet. At the road's far end, maybe 400 yards south, the glint of water was visible, the canal catching the afternoon light. And beside the canal, barely visible through the trees, the roofline of a secondary structure he hadn't known was there. He drove past without stopping. In his mirror, the dirt road sat quiet in the afternoon light, the secondary structure's roof visible above the tree line, the canal glinting beyond it. He drove back toward the highway and thought about a building he hadn't known existed, and a canal that connected to the coast, and a girl who'd been missing for 4 days and hadn't run. Chapter 4. The keyed scratch on the truck door had dried to a dull silver line in the shape of a deliberate thought, and Mike looked at it in the marina parking lot that evening, the way you looked at a message that had been delivered correctly. Donnie had gone inside to call his insurance company, which was the practical next step for a man whose boat was being released tomorrow, and who needed to notify someone about the week of missed charters. Mike stood at the truck with his coffee going cold, and thought about the secondary structure at the end of the Grove Road, and what it meant that Cobb's truck had been at the dock 3 weeks ago, and Cobb was on his phone within an hour of Mike driving past the compound. The call on the way to Port Salerno this morning. Someone in or watching the marina who'd known Mike was there within the time it took to walk from the harbormaster's shack to Slip 12. He'd been tracked since Port Salerno, which meant they knew about Bobby Nash, and they knew about the slip log, and they decided the appropriate response was a phone call rather than anything harder, which told him something about where the operation was in its timeline. Not so deep into the problem that making Mike disappear was worth the exposure, but close enough to something that they'd noticed him immediately and responded within the hour. He texted Harris, "Sending you 6 photographs. Girl's phone. Grove delivery, Tallman South Dock. One face matches witness ID of man on flat bottom at Port Salerno. Call me when you've seen them." Sent the photographs to Harris number. Then he called Jennings. "The secondary structure," he said. "At the end of the Grove Road, south of the main camp. Did it show on any satellite image you can pull?" "Already looked," Jennings said. "It's on the county property records as an agricultural equipment storage building, permitted 2019, registered to Tallman Citrus Holdings. Sits about 60 feet from the Canal bank. Tallman know what it's being used for." Rick Tallman's been cooperative with his labor contractor for 4 years, which is a long time to not ask questions about what a contractor does on your land. She paused. "I talked to a deputy sheriff here about the missing persons report. He's been sitting on it. I pushed. Hard. Hard enough. He's going out to the camp tomorrow morning to interview Cobb." "Tomorrow morning's too slow," Mike said. "I know. I'm working on moving it up." She paused. "The FBI contact in West Palm. She got back to me an hour ago. When I described the photographs and the export-controlled label, she asked 2 questions. First question, is there any indication of the destination country? Second question, how many cases in total? What's the significance of those questions? She's trying to determine whether this matches something her office has been running already. She said there's an ongoing investigation into illegal export of electronic warfare components through non-standard channels, not container shipping, not air freight, smaller vessels, Gulf of Mexico and Atlantic coastal routes." Jennings paused. "She said the investigation has been running for 8 months and has identified multiple transfer points along the Florida coast, but hasn't found the inland origin." "The Grove is the inland origin," Mike said. "That's what she thinks. She's driving up tomorrow to look at the photographs in person." "Anna, Medina doesn't have until tomorrow." "I know that too." Jennings let the statement sit without dressing it up. "Mike, what are you going to do tonight?" "Nothing yet. I want to see the dock in daylight first, before I decide what it looks like in the dark." "That's not an answer to the question I asked." "I know," he said, which was the accurate response. He went back to the Grove Road at 6 the next morning, alone, before the light had fully committed to the day. He left his truck on the county road shoulder, a quarter-mile north of the turnoff, and walked in through the grove on the east side of the dirt road rather than on the road itself, the rows of stripped orange trees providing cover that wasn't perfect but was enough at this hour. The grove smelled of turned earth and the faint chemical sweetness of a recent spray application, and his boots found the soft ground between the tree rows without much noise. He moved at a pace that covered ground without creating urgency, the discipline of 20 years in environments where the speed of movement and the sound of movement were the 2 variables that determined outcomes. The secondary structure resolved as he got closer, a building about 30 by 40 feet, corrugated metal walls, a roll-up door on the south face and a standard door on the east face, no windows. Agricultural in appearance, correctly permitted, entirely ordinary, except for the fact that the ground around it had been compacted by vehicle traffic far heavier than agricultural equipment typically required. He stopped at the tree line, 20 yards from the building's northeast corner. Listened. The canal moved behind the building, the low sound of moving water. Birds in the grove. The distant cough of a truck engine from the direction of the main camp, still far enough away to be irrelevant. No voices. No light from the building. No human sound. He moved up to the east wall and pressed against it, put his ear to the corrugated metal. Nothing moving inside. He tried the east door. Locked with a padlock, commercial grade, the kind that didn't give to improvised tools. He went around the south face, checking the roll-up door, same padlock system, mounted on a bracket that was new, the bracket screws still showing silver rather than the dull gray of oxidized metal. The padlock and bracket had been installed recently. Either the building's use had changed recently, or the value of what was inside had increased to the point that the previous lock wasn't adequate. The building had a foundation vent on the north face, low to the ground, screened with metal mesh. He crouched and looked through it into darkness. Smelled machine oil and something else, closed air, the specific stillness of a space that had been occupied recently but wasn't currently. And something else. Faint. The kind of thing that made the back of his neck register before his conscious mind caught up. Food. Recent food. The smell of a space where someone had been eating. He stood and checked his watch. 6:22. The grove was getting lighter by the minute, and the main camp's morning activity would be starting. He had maybe 10 more minutes before someone on the early shift came within visual range. He went back around the east face, looked at the padlock, took out his phone and photographed it. The model number was printed on the face, a master lock commercial series. Then photographed the bracket, the new screws, the ground in front of the door where the tire tracks were heaviest. 3 distinct tire patterns. One set belonged to something narrow-wheeled, a cart or a dolly. The other 2 were vehicle tires, one standard truck size, one wider, possibly the flat-bottoms trailer or a commercial vehicle. He was backing toward the tree line when the east door opened from the inside. He moved left, behind the northeast corner, fast enough that the person coming through the door saw nothing. He heard the door open fully, footsteps, a man's breathing, the sound of someone coming out for air rather than coming out to check the perimeter. Through the gap between the building's wall and his own body, pressed flat against the corrugated metal, he could see the edge of the door and the boots of the man standing in it. Work boots, dark, with a steel cap visible at the toe. The man stood there for 30 seconds, not moving, just breathing the outside air with the quality of someone who'd been inside for a long time. Then the boots shifted, turned, went back through the door. The door closed. Someone was in the building. He moved back through the grove at the same controlled pace, faster in the sections where the tree cover was thicker, and reached his truck without incident. Sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel. One man inside the building. Possibly more. The food smell, the closed air. Someone had been held there or was being held there or had been recently. He called Jennings at 6:31. The secondary structure, he said. Someone's inside. I need you to make the deputy's visit happen this morning, not tomorrow. What did you find? Heard movement inside. One man at minimum came to the door for air. He paused. Jennings. The smell inside was food. Recent. Someone's been living in that building. A 2-second silence. I'll make the call now. Give me 20 minutes. He drove to a gas station on 512, bought 2 coffees and a breakfast sandwich that was wrong in every specific way, but provided the calories a morning like this one was going to need, and ate sitting in the parking lot while the sky got fully light. Harris called at 6:58. The photographs, Harris said. The face your witness identified. Donnie Frears, Mike said. Positive ID. I ran the image through our database. The man's name is Paul Griggs. He's got a federal record, Previous export violation, 2019, reduced to a misdemeanor in a plea deal. He's been on a watch list since then, but nothing actionable until now. Harris paused. The equipment label in photograph 5. I had our technical unit look at the resolution. They pulled enough characters to identify the product line. It's a tactical communications jamming system. Military spec. Export controlled under the International Traffic in Arms Regulations. ITAR, Mike said. ITAR. Moving this equipment without State Department licensing is a federal felony. Each shipment is a separate count. Harris paused. This is outside DEA's primary jurisdiction, but we have authority on ITAR violations. I'm looping in State's Export Control Office and pulling in additional resources. There's a girl missing, Mike said. 17. She photographed that delivery. I heard from Jennings, Harris said. 4 days. There's someone in the storage building at the south end of the Grove right now. I was there this morning. A pause. Mike, don't go back there before we have something in place. If they're holding the girl and you go in alone. I'm aware of the math, Mike said. I'm not sure you are, Harris said, with the directness of a federal agent who'd seen what happened when civilians ran their own math on hostage situations. Give me 2 hours. I can have a team positioned. 2 hours, Mike said. Call me when they're in place. He hung up and drank the bad coffee, which was bad in the specific way of gas station coffee that had been running since 4 a.m. and had lost its relationship with the concept of fresh somewhere around 5:30. The key scratch on the truck door caught the morning light. 2 hours. The Grove Road quiet at 6:57. The orange trees running their stripped rows in either direction. The canal somewhere at the south end doing its indifferent thing. He called Donnie. The boat, Mike said. The Sally Mae. Harris is releasing her today. Can you be at Port Salerno by 9? I've been ready since Tuesday, Donnie said. Get there. Get the boat fueled and ready to move. Don't go out, just be ready. He paused. Donnie. That canal from the coast to the Grove. You've run it enough times to know the depth, the current, the bottom type. I know it like my own driveway. If someone needed to get to the south dock from the canal, without being visible from the road, what would they take? Donnie was quiet for a moment. Small skiff, shallow draft. Flat bottom would work. The channel runs to about 4 feet at low water in the middle section. Another pause. Mike, what are you planning? 2 hours from now, nothing. After that, depends on Harris. You want me to have the boat ready in case. I want you to have the boat ready in case, Mike confirmed. He sat in the gas station parking lot for 20 minutes, watching the 512 traffic build as the morning expanded. The Grove trucks and the agricultural supply deliveries and the school buses running their routes. The whole ordinary apparatus of a Tuesday morning in a farming community conducting itself with no awareness of what was sitting in a corrugated metal building 4 miles west of this parking lot. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Different from the morning's call, different area code, just 3 words. She's still here. He looked at the text. Typed back, who is this? No response. The number showed as a prepaid line, untraceable from his end. She's still here. Present tense. Someone with knowledge of Anna's location, sending a 3-word text to a number they'd gotten from somewhere, telling him the girl was alive. He forwarded the text to Jennings and Harris simultaneously. Harris called back in 4 minutes. Where did that come from? Unknown prepaid. Someone inside the operation who's decided to pass information. Or someone running a lure. Or that, Mike said. But the text was sent after I was at the building this morning. Someone saw me there and decided to tell me she's inside rather than report me to Cobb. He paused. That's not the behavior of someone running a lure. That's the behavior of someone who's been watching a 17-year-old girl sit in a storage building for 4 days and has decided they're done with what that looks like. Harris was quiet for a moment. 90 minutes. Not 2 hours. I'm moving faster. I'll be at the Grove Road turnoff. Do not go down the road before I call you, Harris said, the tone of a man who expected to be obeyed and was aware he had no actual authority over the man he was telling this to. I mean it, Mike. 90 minutes, Mike said. He drove back to the Grove Road and parked on the shoulder a quarter-mile north of the turnoff, same spot as the morning, and sat with the engine off. The Grove ran quiet on both sides. No activity visible at the turnoff. Cobb's black pickup was not visible from this position, which meant it was either at the compound or somewhere else entirely. At 8:43, 53 minutes into the 90, Cobb's pickup appeared from the Grove Road, turned north on the county road, and passed Mike's position doing 40 miles an hour without slowing. Mike let it get a quarter-mile ahead and pulled out behind it. Not following, parallel intelligence. Cobb going somewhere in a hurry told Mike something. Specifically, Cobb going north rather than south or east told Mike he wasn't going to the dock and he wasn't going to Port Salerno. North on the county road went to 512 and from there to Sebastian or Vero Beach or anywhere the highway system connected to. He tracked the pickup to 512 and watched it turn east toward the coast, and then let it go because following it further put him in visible pursuit range on a 2-lane road, and because the important thing wasn't where Cobb was going, it was that Cobb had left the Grove. He pulled over and called Harris. Cobb just left heading east on 512, Mike said. He's not at the compound. I know, Harris said. We've had eyes on the compound from the air for the last 20 minutes. The compound has 2 men present, neither of them Cobb. The building at the south end shows 1 heat signature. 1 heat signature. She's alone in there, Mike said. She's alone in there with a padlocked door, which is its own problem, Harris said. We're 12 minutes out. I need you to stay on the county road. 12 minutes, Mike said. He stayed on the county road for 11 of them. At the 11th minute, he drove to the Grove Road turnoff and stopped there, engine running, which was technically still on the county road, and therefore technically compliance with Harris' instruction, and which put him 400 yards from the building rather than a quarter-mile. At 12 minutes, a convoy of 3 vehicles came down the county road from the north. 2 unmarked sedans and a van with no windows, moving fast, the specific organized speed of a federal team that knew exactly where it was going. Harris' sedan pulled alongside Mike's truck. Harris rolled his window down. Stay here, Harris said. I'll stay here, Mike said, meaning it this time, because a federal team moving on a building with a hostage didn't need an additional variable, and Harris had done everything he'd said he'd do in the time he'd said he'd do it. The convoy turned down the Grove Road. Mike sat on the county road with the engine running and listened to the Grove, which was quiet, the orange trees stripped and patient, the canal somewhere south doing its canal thing, and counted the seconds the way he'd learned to count them in situations where counting was the only available action. Not to track time, but to give himself something to do that wasn't moving when moving was wrong. At 4 minutes and 20 seconds, he heard a door impact, the clean institutional sound of a federal team making entry. At 4 minutes and 40 seconds, his phone rang. Harris. She's here, Harris said. She's okay. Scared, dehydrated, but okay. Mike put both hands on the steering wheel and looked at the Grove Road. Tell her her mother's going to call her in about 5 minutes, Mike said. I'll tell her. Harris paused. Come down. He drove the Grove Road slowly, the 400 yards feeling longer than they were, the orange trees on both sides giving way to the cleared area around the secondary structure where the federal vehicles sat at angles that suggested rapid deployment rather than orderly parking. Anna Medina sat on the ground outside the building's east door, wrapped in a jacket that was too big for her, one of the federal agents crouching beside her. She was thin, in the way 4 days without proper food produced, and her eyes had the specific quality of someone who'd been in a frightening situation long enough to have made a private deal with themselves about how to survive it. She looked at Mike when he got out of the truck, not with recognition, they'd never met, but with the particular attention of someone who'd been waiting for something to happen and was trying to determine if this was it. He crouched down to her level. "Your mother's name is Rosa," he said. "She makes good eggs." Anna Medina looked at him for 1 second. Then she started crying, the specific crying of someone who'd been holding it together for 4 days on the promise that holding it together was the right strategy, and had just discovered they'd been right. Mike stayed crouched until she was done. Harris appeared behind him. "Cobb's in custody. Sebastian PD picked him up on 512. He'd made 3 phone calls in the last hour. We have the numbers." He paused. "The 2 men at the compound are talking to my team. The flat bottom is at the dock. Everything we need to build the export case is in that building." "Good," Mike said, which was a small word for a large morning, but it was the right one. He stood up and called Rosa. She answered before the first ring finished. "She's here," Mike said. "She's okay. You're going to get a call from a federal agent named Harris in the next few minutes telling you where to come." Rosa said nothing for a moment. The sound of her breathing, and the sound of her lunch counter's radio playing something with brass in the background, and the specific quality of silence from a woman absorbing information she'd been waiting 4 days to receive. "Thank you," Rosa said. "She's tougher than 4 days in a metal building," Mike said. "She gets that from somewhere." Rosa made a sound that was crying and laughing at the same time, which was the right sound for the moment, and Mike let it be what it was before he said goodbye and hung up. He walked to where Harris was standing near the building's open roll-up door, looking at what was inside. The metal cases were stacked 4 high along the interior wall, maybe 30 of them. Foam-lined, export-controlled. The equipment inside representing exactly the kind of transaction that required federal licensing that this operation had specifically and repeatedly declined to obtain. "How big is this?" Mike said. "This shipment? Significant." Harris looked at the cases. "The 8-month investigation I mentioned. The one looking for the inland origin point. We've been tracking coastal transfers for months. If this is the source, we're looking at 25 shipments that we know about, possibly more we don't." "Where was it going?" Harris looked at him with the look of a federal agent deciding how much to share with a civilian. "Eastern Europe probably," Harris said. "The jamming system specifically. There's active demand from several non-NATO aligned state actors." He paused. "That's not the local story. The local story is a 17-year-old girl who did the right thing and is sitting outside right now." "That is the local story," Mike said. He walked back to where Anna sat, the 2 big jackets still around her shoulders, the federal agent beside her now on the phone, arranging the transport that would get Anna to her mother. The Grove morning ran around them. Birds, the canal, the orange trees doing their indifferent agricultural thing. On the drive back north, an hour later, Donnie called. "Sally Mae's released," he said. "I'm at Port Salerno. She's fueled up." "Take her out," Mike said. "Run whatever route you want." "The birding canal," Donnie said, and Mike could hear in it that Donnie was asking whether it was over, whether the canal was his again. "The birding canal," Mike said. "All of it." He drove north on 512 toward the coast with the Grove running alongside, and the morning fully arrived. The specific quality of a November morning in the Indian River County interior that didn't announce its own beauty, but provided it anyway. And thought about Anna Medina's photographs, 6 images taken through a gap in wooden planking by a 17-year-old who'd been right about what she was looking at and had not waited when she thought she was right. The Johnson thread arrived in his head the way it always arrived, the background radiation. Harris had said something about the export investigation running for 8 months, about coastal transfer points, about state actors, about the kind of federal case that had upstream implications that a local investigation didn't produce. Somewhere in the federal architecture of an arms export operation running through a Florida citrus grove, there was probably a money trail that ran through familiar channels, familiar shell structures, familiar registered agents in Wilmington, Delaware. He filed it. Let it go. The local story was the local story. And the local story was a girl sitting outside a corrugated metal building with a borrowed jacket and a mother who was on her way. The rest was other people's work, at least for today. Chapter 5. The DIA field office in Stewart had a conference room that seated 8 and smelled like the coffee maker in the corner had been running since before anyone currently employed there had started working there. Harris spread 6 photographs across the table, printouts of Anna's originals, enlarged to 8 by 10, the grain from the low-light phone camera smoothed somewhat by the enhancement process his technical unit had run on them overnight. Mike sat across from Harris with Donnie beside him, Donnie's hands flat on the table, with the stillness of a man who'd been waiting 4 days to be in a room where his name meant something other than a drug charge. Jennings was on speakerphone from Colusa K, her voice running clean through the room's system. Griggs, Harris said, pointing to the face in photograph 6. Paul Griggs. The prior ETAR violation in 2019 was a misdemeanor plea. He pled down from a felony on cooperation that never produced anything useful. Our Miami office suspected he was still active, but couldn't get close enough. He looked at Donnie. Your identification puts him at the Tallman Grove 3 weeks before this came apart. That's material. I saw what I saw, Donnie said. I know you did. Harris moved to photograph 4, the open case. The equipment is a AN PLQ-7 family jammer. Specifically, the export-controlled variant with the extended frequency range. There are 12 units in what we recovered from the building, plus 18 additional cases of ancillary components. He paused. Current black market value for that configuration, depending on the end buyer, somewhere between $4 and $7 million. The room held that number for a moment. How many shipments before this one? Jennings said from the speaker. Based on the transfer documentation we found in the building, a manifest log Griggs apparently kept, which is either very professional or very stupid, there have been 11 prior shipments over 18 months. Each shipment ran between 8 and 14 cases, similar equipment profile. Harris looked at the manifest. The Canal route, the offshore transfer to a vessel the manifest designates only as relay, the timing windows, it's been running like a supply chain. Relay vessel, Mike said. The freighter anchorage 3 miles out. Same anchorage every time, according to the manifest. Vessel never identified by name or registration, only by a contact frequency and a scheduled window. Harris tapped the manifest. The offshore relay vessel is someone else's problem. State Department and DOD have jurisdiction on the receiving end. My problem is the domestic operation. Cobb, Mike said. Cobb is talking. Harris said it with the flat satisfaction of a man who'd expected the talking and was not surprised by it. He's been running the labor camp contracting as legitimate cover for 4 years. Griggs approached him 18 months ago. The arrangement was straightforward. Cobb provided the storage building, the canal access, and cover for the cargo arrivals, which moved through the grove as agricultural equipment deliveries. In exchange, Cobb received a flat fee per shipment. How much per shipment? $15,000. Donnie looked at the table. The expression of a man calculating what $15,000 per shipment meant against the moral weight of what the shipments were. Who approached Griggs originally? Jennings said. Who set up the operation? Griggs didn't build this network independently. That's the question we're working on, Harris said. Griggs had a contact he called the broker. Never met the broker in person. All communication ran through encrypted messaging. Funds moved through a cryptocurrency account that we're working on tracing. He looked at the manifest. The broker sourced the equipment, arranged the offshore relay, and identified the canal route as a viable domestic transfer corridor. The canal route, Mike said. Specifically the Port Salerno access, the Fellsmere Arm, the Tallman Grove terminus. That's specific operational knowledge. Someone who knew that waterway, who knew Donnie ran it regularly, who knew the Grove's south boundary had canal access. Harris looked at him. The broker knew this coast, Mike said. Knew it operationally, not from a map. Knew which route was legitimate enough to use as cover. Knew whose boat to frame when they needed the route to look investigated. Harris wrote something. We're working that angle. Work it fast, Mike said. Because whoever the broker is, they knew within hours that I was asking questions at Port Salerno, and they knew within 24 hours that Ana Medina had sent photographs to Luis Barrera. He paused. That's real-time intelligence on a local investigation. Which means either someone in or adjacent to the local law enforcement infrastructure is feeding them, or they've been monitoring this waterway and these communities with a level of resources that doesn't belong to a man running black market arms through a citrus grove. Harris was quiet for a moment. What's your read on the anonymous text? She's still here. 3 words that had sent Mike to the building's foundation vent at 6:20 in the morning. Someone inside the operation who didn't want to be inside it anymore, Mike said. Not Cobb. Cobb's instinct was to lawyer up, which is the instinct of a man protecting his position. This was someone with direct knowledge of Anna's location, who made a decision to pass that information at the moment they knew I was close. He paused. Could be one of Cobb's workers. Could be someone on Griggs's crew. Could be someone who saw me at the building in the morning and decided that 4 days of a teenager in a storage shed was the thing that changed their calculation. We'll find out, Harris said. When we work through the crew. Find out quickly, Jennings said from the speaker. Because if the broker has the monitoring capability Mike's describing, they're already aware the operation's been disrupted, and they're making decisions about what to do about it. Harris looked at his hands. We have Griggs, we have Cobb, we have the equipment, we have the manifest. The broker is the next tier, and the broker is federal. He looked at Mike. Your part in this is done. Mike looked at him. My part in this was finding a missing girl and clearing a man's name. Both accomplished. Both accomplished, Harris confirmed. The rest is mine. Then do it well, Mike said, which was the shortest version of several things he could have said, and the one most likely to produce the desired effect. Donnie was quiet on the drive back to Colusa Cay, which was the appropriate response to a week that had gone from a DIA impound notice to federal arms export charges in 4 days, and which Mike gave him for the full 40 minutes of US 1 without filling with conversation. They were almost to the marina turnoff when Donnie said, the birding tour clients. The ones I had when I saw Griggs at the dock. What about them? They filed a review online. Said the tour was excellent, that I clearly knew the waterway, that the guide was knowledgeable and professional. He looked at the road. I was thinking about that this morning when I went to get the boat. These people came from Ohio to see roseate spoonbills on the Fellsmere Canal, and I showed them roseate spoonbills. And 3 weeks later, it turns out the canal I was running was being used to move military jamming equipment. He paused. The Ohio people had a real nice time. Mike looked at him. That's the thing about this coast, Donnie said. All of it happening at once. Ohio people seeing spoonbills. Arms dealers using the canal. You running around trying to sort out which is which. He shook his head. How do you do that? How do you keep doing that? Somebody has to, Mike said. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. Earl Tucker's marina appeared on the right, the Marlin sign at the entrance catching the afternoon sun at its crooked angle, and Mike pulled into the lot and sat with the engine idling. The Sally Mae, he said. She running clean? Ran her for an hour this morning after they released her. She's good. Donnie looked at the marina. I've got 3 rescheduled charters starting Thursday. Back to the calendar. Good. Donnie got out, then stopped with the door open. The girl. Anna. She's with Rosa. Harris' team took her to the for a check. Nothing serious, dehydration, and she'd hurt her wrist at some point. Rosa was there when she came out of the exam room. He paused. Anna had her phone. Still had the photographs. Tough kid. Her mother's tougher, Mike said. She came by that honestly. Donnie nodded once, the nod of a man satisfied with an outcome, and went to check his boat. The ribs were the thing. They'd been the thing since the previous afternoon, when he'd taken a shot from one of Cobb's men in the compound confrontation. A solid strike that had landed in the floating rib section on his left side, where a floating rib had no structural defense to offer. He'd been managing it since then, with the specific discipline of someone who knew the difference between broken and bruised, and had determined this was bruised, which meant it would hurt for 10 days and then stop hurting, and there was nothing a doctor was going to do about it except confirm the assessment. He sat at the kitchen table that evening, with the assessment confirmed, and a bag of frozen peas against his left side, and Jennings on the phone giving him the update on the pieces she'd been running. Rick Tallman, Jennings said. The Grove owner. He's cooperating with Harris fully, which I expected. Tallman's a third-generation grower who rented his contractor to a man who turned out to be running arms through his agricultural storage building. That's not the same thing as being an arms dealer, and his attorney made that clear to Harris this morning. She paused. He's giving Harris everything on Cobb. 4 years of contractor records, every access Cobb had, every person Cobb brought onto the property. Good. Luis Barrera, she continued. I talked to him this afternoon. He's going to be treated as a cooperative witness, same as I told him. No exposure on the photographs. She paused. He's staying at Rosa's for the time being. He and Anna have some things to work through. They'll work through them, Mike said. Kids that age, that kind of thing either breaks it or makes it unbreakable. Given what he did, keeping the photographs, giving them up when it mattered, I'd guess unbreakable. That's optimistic of you. I have my moments. The anonymous text, Jennings said. Harris identified the sender. One of Cobb's workers, a man named Felipe Torres who'd been on the labor camp roster for 6 months. He'd seen Anna being brought in 4 days ago and had been sitting on it. When Mike appeared at the building in the morning, Torres decided Mike was the right place to send the information. She paused. He's cooperating fully. Harris is treating him as a witness, not a subject. Good read on Torres, Mike said. You made the read. I just confirmed it. He shifted the frozen peas and tried not to make a sound about it, which was only partially successful. You're hurt, Jennings said. I'm fine. You took a hit in the compound. I took a hit. I'm fine. Go to the doctor. I'll go to the doctor if it gets worse, Mike said, which was the version of agreeing to go to the doctor that didn't involve going to the doctor. Jennings made the sound she made when she'd decided something wasn't worth the argument and moved past it. The broker. Harris is working the cryptocurrency trail on the payment account. He thinks he'll have something in 2 to 3 weeks. Tell him to share it with me when he does. He said the same thing. He'll share it when he has something, because he wants to know if you recognize the structure. She paused. Mike. The broker's operational knowledge of the Port Salerno waterway. Donnie's route, specifically the monitoring capability. Does that feel like something connected to what we've been working on this summer? The background radiation. Always there. Yes, he said. Johnson's network. Harmon's infrastructure. The shell entities. She paused. The Wilmington registered agent on the Center Console's LLC registration. I ran it this afternoon. Mike set the frozen peas on the table. Same building, Jennings said. Different suite. Same Wilmington building as the Lakeview and Sandpiper entities. There it was. Not the main story. Not the thing to pull tonight. Just the thread confirming that the machine was still running somewhere in the background, adapting, finding new operations now that the Florida waterfront plays were disrupted. Put it in the file, Mike said. Send it to Drummond. Already sent. A brief pause. The thread goes somewhere we haven't found yet. It always goes somewhere we haven't found yet, Mike said. That's the nature of the thread. He put the frozen peas back against his ribs and looked at the kitchen ceiling with its familiar crack running from the fixture to the corner, and the quiet of a Tuesday evening in Colusa Cay settled around him, the tree frogs starting up outside, Mrs. Alvarez's porch light coming on across the way. His phone buzzed. Not Jennings, a text from Donnie. First charter Thursday is a birding group. Want to come? Mike looked at the text. Outside, the November evening was doing its reasonable thing, cool without committing to cold, the kind of Florida evening that didn't ask anything of the people in it. He typed back, I'll come. Then looked at the frozen peas, at his ribs, at the practical reality of a boat at dawn with the bruised ribs he currently had. Typed, might sit down a lot. Donnie, the spoonbills don't care if you sit down. He put the phone on the table and let the evening be the evening. Somewhere in a hospital in Vero Beach, Anna Medina was being checked out after 4 days in a storage building and was going home to a lunch counter on 512 where her mother made good eggs, and a radio played something with brass. Luis Barrera was at Rose's place, probably sitting in the kitchen, probably saying things that needed saying, and finding the words somewhere in the difficulty of saying them. Donnie's boat was in her slip at Port Salerno, fueled, the impound paperwork canceled, the Sally Mae as clean as she'd ever been because Donnie always kept her clean. Harris had 12 boxes of illegal arms export hardware in federal custody, and a manifest that connected 11 prior shipments to an offshore relay vessel that the State Department was now looking for in the Atlantic somewhere east of Florida. And in a Wilmington, Delaware office building, a suite that didn't match any of the other suites they'd found this summer, sat a registered agent filing for a boat registration connected to an arms broker whose identity Harris would track through a cryptocurrency account over the next 2 or 3 weeks, and whose connection to the machine that had been running all summer was a thread that would eventually need pulling. Not tonight. Tonight, the frozen peas and the tree frogs and the porch light. He went to bed at 9:30, which was early, which was what his ribs wanted, and which he allowed, because allowing it was the thing that kept the ribs from becoming a problem that required the doctor he'd told Jennings he'd see only if it got worse. In the morning, the beach. Maybe the detector. The tide would have something to say about that. Chapter 6. Wednesday came in clear, after 2 days of clouds that hadn't committed to anything, the sky going blue without ceremony, the kind of November morning that made Florida's case for itself without trying. Mike ran the beach at 5:45 with his ribs, contributing a running commentary on the experience that he chose to interpret as information rather than complaint. The strike zone on the left side lit up on every footfall in a way that confirmed bruised rather than broken. Broken ribs produced a grinding quality that this didn't have, and he adjusted his stride slightly, shortened his arm swing on the left, and kept moving because stopping was worse than the running commentary. The beach at this hour was empty, except for a man fishing from the sand with 2 rods set in spike holders, seated in a low chair with a thermos, conducting the particular patient negotiation with the ocean that surf fishermen engaged in, which required nothing of Mike except not walking between the man and the water, which he didn't. He ran his 3 miles and came back, and stood at the water's edge for a minute, letting the tide wash over his shoes because the tide didn't care about his shoes, and neither did he particularly, and thought about the broker. The broker who knew the Port Salerno waterway, who knew Donnie's route, who knew which boat to frame and how to frame it, who communicated exclusively through encrypted channels and cryptocurrency, and had never appeared on any surveillance photograph that Harris' 8-month investigation had produced. Operational security at that level wasn't Cobb. Cobb was a labor camp contractor who got paid $15,000 a shipment and kept his receipts in a coffee can, which was the security architecture of a man whose primary professional skill was not security architecture. The broker was someone else. Someone who'd assessed the canal system, identified Donnie's charter operation as the legitimate cover they needed, and built the frame with enough sophistication that it had taken Bobby Nash's 16 years of institutional knowledge and Mike's willingness to treat the warrant as a starting point rather than a conclusion to see past it. He walked back up the beach, thinking about who knew these waterways well enough to build an operation around them. The answer came from an unexpected direction, the way the useful answers generally came. Not from pulling the right thread, but from setting down the wrong one long enough that the right one became visible. He'd stopped at Gus's for coffee at 7, which Gus provided without the ceremony of the evening Modelo. Just a mug and the pot, and the understanding that 7 a.m. coffee at Gus's was a working transaction rather than a social one. Dewey Pruitt wasn't there yet. Dewey arrived between 9 and 10, depending on whether he had somewhere to be, which he rarely did. Earl Tucker came in at 7:15. Earl didn't come to Gus's in the morning. Earl was at his marina in the morning, had been at his marina in the morning for 30 years. The fact of Earl sitting down on the stool beside Mike at 7:15 on a Wednesday carried its own information. "Somebody asking about your boat," Earl said. Mike looked at him. "Yesterday afternoon. Man came by the dock, said he was looking at slips, thinking about keeping a boat at Tucker's. Walked the whole dock, asked the right questions." Earl drank the coffee Gus put down. Spent about 8 minutes looking at the Perseverance, Pat Doyle's boat. He focused on Pat's boat, specifically. Long enough that I noticed. Earl turned the mug on the counter. He wasn't from around here. Not his clothes, not his shoes. He asked about the marina's overnight security, like a man who was looking for gaps rather than a man who was reassured by the answer. Description: 50 maybe. Good shape, not gym shape, work shape. Dark hair going gray. He had the specific quality. Earl stopped, recalibrated. He moved like somebody who'd spent time on water, professionally. Not a sport fisherman. Commercial or military. He leave a name. Said his name was Carter. Didn't offer a last name. Earl looked at the marina through Gus's window. The slips visible from here. I watched him leave. He parked on the street, not in the lot. Car was a rental. You get the plate. Partial. Florida rental tag. Earl wrote the partial number on a paper napkin which he slid across to Mike. Mike. After what happened in the Grove this week, a man asking about boats at my dock with rental plates and no last name. You were right to notice it, Mike said. And right to come tell me. Earl finished his coffee, set the mug down. I'll be at the dock, if you need me. He left, the door closing behind him with the specific Gus's door sound that Mike had been hearing for 3 years. Gus refilled Mike's mug without being asked. Mike looked at the partial plate on the napkin. Not a birder. Not a tourist. A man who knew which boat belonged to a commercial salvage diver and had spent 8 minutes appraising it. Pat Doyle's federal permit was reinstated. Pat's boat was back in service. The debris field case was Drummond's now. But someone was checking whether the boat was accessible. He called Pat from the parking lot. Pat answered on the second ring, the background sound of marine engine noise suggesting he was already working. Your boat, Mike said. Where is it right now? Slip 4, Tucker's. Why? Don't take it out today. Leave it where it is. I've got a charter at 9. Cancel it. Tell them engine trouble. He paused. Pat, someone was looking at the Perseverance yesterday afternoon. Specifically at your boat. Specifically. A silence, just the engine noise behind it. The survey equipment, Pat said. You recovered it through your permit with federal chain of custody, which puts you on the record as the man who found and surfaced federal evidence in an arms export investigation. Mike paused. That's a position somebody might want to discourage. Discourage how? I don't know yet. But a man who checks your boat's security arrangements before he knows whether you're going to be on it suggests the discouragement is being assessed rather than implemented. He paused. Cancel the charter. I'll come by the marina at 9. He called Jennings next and gave her the partial plate, which she ran through the state system and called back within 11 minutes. The partial matched 3 rental vehicles currently active in the Treasure Coast area, all from the same agency out of West Palm Beach, all with corporate billing accounts. Corporate accounts with rental agencies are common, Jennings said. Could be anything. Could be. But it's the same West Palm Beach connection as Foss. Different rental agency, different account, different week. He paused. Jennings. The survey equipment case is Drummond's. Pat Doyle's involvement in it is documented federal record. If someone's looking to interfere with a witness in a federal case, that's a federal obstruction charge on top of whatever they're already facing, she said. I'll call Drummond, and I'll contact the Coast Guard station about keeping an eye on the Port Salerno area. Call the Martin County Sheriff, too. Somebody should know that Pat's boat is sitting at Tucker's, and there's a reason we'd like eyes on it. I'll call now, she said. Mike drove to the marina. Pat was on the dock, the charter canceled, standing at the slip with his hands in his jacket pockets, and the expression of a man who'd had a complicated enough month already and was not delighted about this addition to it. Tell me what I'm dealing with, Pat said. Honestly, I don't know yet. It might be nothing. Someone who heard about the salvage recovery and wanted to see the boat out of curiosity. Or it might be someone affiliated with the operation we disrupted, who's decided the safest thing to do is make sure the man who recovered the evidence doesn't remain available to testify about it. Pat looked at his boat, at the Perseverance sitting in its slip in the November morning. I've been diving this coast for 30 years, he said. I've pulled up things people lost and things people threw away, and once a car with somebody in it that turned out to be a murder case in Palm Beach County from 1987. He paused. I've never had someone come look at my boat because of what I found. The difference is what you found this time, Mike said. Those survey units, the chain of custody, the manifest connection. You're a witness in a federal case involving defense technology export. That's a different category than a 1987 Palm Beach murder. How different? People with defense technology export charges have more to lose than people with 1987 murder charges, Mike said, which was the honest answer if not the comforting one. Pat looked at the inlet. Billy, Pat said. He knows about this. Not yet. He should stay away from the marina today. Pat called Billy from the dock, a short conversation that ended with Pat saying, just stay at the apartment, twice, which confirmed that Billy's natural inclination was not to stay at the apartment. The man came back at 11. Mike was in Earl's office trailer, the window that faced the parking lot giving him a sightline to anyone coming down the dock ramp, and he saw the rental car, nondescript silver sedan, West Palm plates, pull into the lot at 11:04. The man who got out matched Earl's description, closely enough to confirm it was the same visit. 50, work fit, dark hair silvering at the temples, the kind of physical economy in his movements that came from professional training applied over a long career. He wore a jacket appropriate to the weather. Nothing distinctive, the whole presentation calibrated to be unremarkable. He walked to the gate and pressed the intercom. Earl's voice came through the dock speaker. "Help you?" "Carter. I was here yesterday looking at slips. Wondered if I could come down and take another look at the 32-foot contender configuration in slip 4. Mike was out of the office trailer before Earl answered, moving along the dock's interior line, the path between the office and the fuel pumps that was sheltered from the parking lot's view by the bait shop building. He came out at the dock ramp's base as Earl buzzed Carter through the gate. Carter came down the ramp and stopped when he saw Mike standing at the bottom of it. A half second. Carter's eyes ran a full assessment, Mike's position, the dock layout, the exits, the distance between them, in the time it took Mike to register that the assessment was happening. The same red Mike used, the same speed, the same instinctive mapping of a space for what it offered and what it didn't. Professional recognition. Two people who'd both spent careers reading rooms and immediately knowing they were in one together. "Carter," Mike said. "Ramble." Carter said it without surprise, which confirmed he'd known Mike was at the marina before he came through the gate. The slip visit was a test or an approach, not a reconnaissance. "You know my name," Mike said. "I know your name." Carter came the rest of the way down the ramp, unhurried, and stopped 6 feet from Mike in the dock's open area, the boats at their slips on either side, the water doing its business underneath. "I'm not here about the salvage diver. Tell me what you're here about." Carter looked at the slip where the Perseverance sat, then back at Mike. "The operation in the Grove. The broker." Mike waited. "Harris is working the cryptocurrency trail," Carter said. "He'll get somewhere in 2 to 3 weeks. What he'll find will connect the payment accounts to a series of intermediary entities that eventually trace to an operational account." He paused. "That account is one I've been watching for 14 months. "Who do you work for?" Mike said. Carter reached into his jacket pocket. Not fast, not a threat, the deliberate motion of a man producing credentials rather than anything else. He held out a card. Defense Intelligence Agency. A name that wasn't Carter. Carter was apparently the door-knocking name. The actual name was Robert Marsh, which was also probably not his name, but was more official than Carter. "Dia," Mike said. "We've had an interest in the broker for over a year," Carter said. "The arms export operation through the Grove is one of 5 we've identified connected to the same broker network. The others are in Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, and Maryland." He put the card back. "Griggs is a contractor. The broker is a principal. When Harris traces the cryptocurrency, what he finds is going to create a jurisdictional question about who owns the case." "Dia," Mike said. "The equipment being exported is military specification. Some of it classified. The offense isn't just ETAR violation. It's potentially espionage, depending on the destination and the end use." He looked at Mike. "I'm not here to take Harris' case. I'm here because you found the inland origin point in 4 days when we've been looking for it for 14 months, and because the broker's identity is something you might be able to help us arrive at faster than the cryptocurrency trail will. Why would I know something about the broker that 14 months of DIA investigation doesn't know?" Carter looked at the water. At the Perseverance in its slip. At the inlet beyond the dock's end. Because the broker's operational knowledge of this specific waterway suggests someone who was active in this area for an extended period, he said. Not a current resident. Someone who was here, learned the water, and moved on. He paused. Your background, the networks you've had access to, you might recognize a signature we haven't been able to put a name to. Mike looked at him steadily. The registered agent on the center console, Mike said. Wilmington, Delaware. Same building, as entities connected to a separate federal investigation. Carter's expression stayed neutral, in the specific way of someone working to keep it neutral. The Johnson investigation. You know about the Johnson investigation. We know about most things, Carter said. What we don't know, and what I'd like to know, is whether the broker and the Johnson network are the same organization or separate organizations using the same administrative infrastructure. Mike thought about that. About a Wilmington building that had housed entities connected to Sandpiper, to Lakeview, to First Patriot, to the survey equipment operation, and now to a boat registration connected to an arms broker running military hardware through a citrus grove. Same building, Mike said. Different suites. Different company names. The same registered agent firm serves both. Which suggests coordination or shared infrastructure rather than coincidence, Carter said. It suggests someone built a durable administrative structure and rented it out to multiple operations, Mike said. Like a holding company for criminal logistics. Foss, Carter said. Mike looked at him. Raymond Foss, Carter said. His cooperation agreement with Drummond's office covers the entities he built for the Johnson network. It does not cover entities that used his infrastructure without his primary involvement. He paused. Foss built a system. Other people may be using the system independently. You think the broker is using Foss's infrastructure without Foss's knowledge. We think the broker identified Foss's administrative architecture, understood its design, and replicated it using the same service providers. Carter looked at the doc. Which means we're looking for someone who had access to the inside of Foss's operation, the specific registered agent relationships, the LLC structure, the payment routing, at some point before the cooperation agreement. Mike stood with that. Someone who'd known how Foss built things. Who'd learned the blueprint, either by working inside the Johnson network or by being close enough to it to observe the architecture in detail. Reed, Mike said. Carter looked at him. Jim Reed, Mike said. Political consultant, worked for the Johnson network, had direct access to Foss's administrative infrastructure over multiple years. He's on bail in Florida with a travel restriction. He paused. Reed's cooperation agreement with Drummond covers his role in the political side of the operation. It doesn't cover anything he might have built independently, using what he learned from Foss's structure. Carter's face did something small and controlled that was the professional equivalent of confirming a theory. Reed has a background before the political consulting, Mike said. What's his background? Corporate intelligence, Carter said. Before political work. Specifically, before political work, he spent 6 years as a private contractor for export compliance consulting, helping companies navigate ETAR requirements. ETAR, the same regulatory framework that made moving the Grove's jamming systems a federal felony. Reed had built a career knowing exactly how the export control system worked, exactly where its gaps were, exactly what the documentation trail needed to look like. Reed is the broker, Mike said. We believe so, Carter said. We can't prove it yet. The cryptocurrency trail will get there eventually. But if you have a faster route. Reed's in Melbourne, Mike said. Travel restriction. He's been there since the arrest. He paused. Has he been violating it? Once confirmed, Carter said. He was caught, returned, tighter terms applied. He looked at Mike. A second violation would revoke bail entirely. If someone were to observe him in a location that violated the restriction terms and document it, that documentation goes to his pretrial supervision officer. Mike looked at Carter. "You're not asking me to investigate a federal case," Mike said. "You're asking me to watch a man. I'm telling you that a second bail violation would have significant consequences for the federal investigation's timeline," Carter said. "And I'm noting that Melbourne is 3 hours south of here, which is outside the radius of your usual work." "I don't have a usual radius." "No," Carter said. "You don't." He looked at the inlet. "Reed has a contact in the Keys, who we believe is the physical relay point for his broker communications. Melbourne to the Keys is a 3-hour drive. Also outside his restriction zone. If someone were to observe that trip," Mike said, "that observation, documented, would end Reed's bail and accelerate the federal timeline considerably." Carter looked at Mike directly. "I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm sharing information with a private citizen who has demonstrated an unusual capacity for being in the right place at the right time." "That's a very careful sentence," Mike said. "I'm a careful person," Carter said. He went back up the ramp, through the gate, across the parking lot to the silver sedan. The whole departure had the same unhurried economy as the arrival. A man who moved at exactly the speed the situation required, and not at all faster. The sedan pulled out of the lot and headed south on A1A. Mike stood on the dock a moment, the marina doing its morning business around him, Earl somewhere behind him making his presence known through the ambient sounds of a man who ran a dock and was in the vicinity of a conversation he'd been close enough to hear and was too experienced to ask about directly. "Earl," Mike said. "Yep," Earl said from somewhere near the fuel pumps. "If somebody needed to go to Melbourne for a day, drive down, drive back." "Marina's fine without you for a day," Earl said. "Been fine without you plenty of days." "I know it has." "Donnie's got his boat back. Doc's quiet. Pat's not going anywhere." A pause. "Melbourne's about 3 hours south." "About that," Mike said. "Weather looks good through the weekend," Earl said. "Good driving weather." Mike looked at the inlet, at the water running through it, with the specific indifference of water that had been running through this inlet since long before anyone standing beside it was born. He went to call Jennings. Chapter 7. Melbourne at 2 in the afternoon looked like every other mid-size Florida coastal city that had decided somewhere in the 70s that strip malls were the answer and had never fully revised the opinion. US 1 running through the commercial corridor, the chain restaurants and the auto parts stores, and the mattress outlets that appeared on every US 1 in the state with the same frequency and the same signage, as if the highway itself had a franchise agreement nobody had signed but everybody honored. Mike had driven down alone, 3 hours of I-95 with the windows cracked, and the radio doing the thing Florida radio did in the stretches between cities, alternating between evangelical programming and country music, and occasionally both at once. His ribs had submitted a formal objection to the drive somewhere around Vero Beach, and he'd accepted the objection as filed and kept going. Reed's bail conditions required him to remain within Martin County. Melbourne was Brevard County. The county line sat about 20 miles north of where Mike was currently driving, which meant Reed had been in violation of his bail terms since sometime before Mike arrived, assuming Carter's intelligence was current and Reed had actually made the trip. He'd called Jennings from the car, given her the broad parameters without the Carter conversation's detail, and Jennings had said the things Jennings said when Mike was going somewhere to observe something without backup. Stay out of anything physical, document everything, call her if it moved toward a problem. He'd said he would. He mostly meant it. The motel where Reed had been staying since his Melbourne relocation was a Hampton Inn on the south end of the commercial strip, the kind of property that served long-stay business travelers and had a loyalty program that Reed was presumably not using under his own name. Carter hadn't told Mike the motel specifically. He'd told Mike that Reed had a contact in the Keys, and that Melbourne to the Keys was a 3-hour drive. And the rest was the kind of inference that a man who'd spent 20 years doing this kind of work made from the available information. Mike had 3 Hampton Inns and 2 Marriotts within the bail restriction area to choose from, and he'd started with the Hampton because it was the right price point for a man on bail whose income had evaporated and whose attorneys were burning through whatever resources he had left. He parked across the street at a strip mall with a nail salon and a tax preparation franchise that was dark in November, positioned with a sightline to the Hampton's entrance and parking lot, and ate a gas station sandwich that was wrong in most of its particulars and right in the sense that it provided calories for an afternoon that was going to require them. Reed's rental car, if Reed had a rental car, would be registered to something other than his name. Carter hadn't given him the vehicle. Mike had a face, Peggy Nash's photograph from the conference, the one he'd identified in the hotel lobby in Vero Beach months ago, and a specific enough physical profile that 3 hours of looking at a parking lot entrance wasn't unreasonable. He'd been there 40 minutes when his phone buzzed. Not Jennings, not Carter. A number he'd seen twice before, the unknown prepaid, Felipe Torres's number, the man from Cobb's camp who'd sent the "She's Still Here" text. He answered. "Mr. Ramble." Torres's voice, careful, the English of someone who'd learned it as an adult and used it with precision. "You helped me. With Harris. He's treating me right." "He's a straight agent," Mike said. "I have something else," Torres said. "I didn't tell Harris because I wasn't sure it was useful to him. It might be useful to you." "Tell me." "The man who came to the camp. Before the operation started, before Griggs, before any of the equipment. Maybe 2 years ago, twice, a man came with Cobb and walked the south end of the property. The canal access, the storage building location, the dock." Torres paused. "Cobb told me this man was an investor. That he was looking at using the Grove for a private shipping operation. I didn't think anything about it. This man have a name." "Cobb called him Reed." Mike looked at the Hampton Inn parking lot. "What did he look like?" Mike said. Torres described him. Mid-40s, good-looking in a forgettable way, moved like he was always slightly ahead of the conversation. The description matched the hotel lobby in Vero Beach with enough specificity that Mike didn't need to run it through any additional processing. 2 years ago, Mike said. Reed came to the Grove 2 years ago and walked the canal access and identified the South Dock location. Yes. Torres. Can you put that in writing? A formal statement to Harris. If Harris asks for it. Harris will ask for it, Mike said. When he traces the cryptocurrency and arrives at Reed, your statement puts Reed at the Grove 2 years before the operation, identifying the specific infrastructure the operation used. That's conspiracy from the start. He paused. You did the right thing calling me. I thought I should tell someone before I forgot exactly, Torres said. The mind smooths things over. I wanted to say it while it was still sharp. He hung up. Reed at the Tallman Grove 2 years ago, identifying the canal access and the dock location, setting up the operational infrastructure, then installing Griggs as the logistics manager and Cobb as the local cover. The broker had scouted this waterway in person 2 years before the first shipment, which was the level of operational planning that produced an 8-month federal investigation, finding nothing until a charter boat captain's birding tour clients saw something at a dock from 20 yards away. Mike was still looking at the parking lot, the information settling into the case's shape, when the man he'd been waiting for walked out of the Hampton Inn's lobby. Reed wore slacks and a light jacket, no luggage, the bearing of someone going somewhere specific for a limited time. He crossed the parking lot without looking at the street, which was the specific inattention of a confident man who expected his surroundings to be uncomplicated by anyone paying attention to them. He got into a gray Nissan Altima, current model, and pulled out of the lot heading south. South was the Keys. Mike gave him half a block and pulled out behind him. Following Reed on US 1 through Melbourne's commercial corridor required less tradecraft than following someone through a city. The traffic ran thick enough at 3 in the afternoon that maintaining 3 or 4 cars of separation was natural rather than deliberate. Reed drove at precisely the speed limit, which was the driving habit of a man on bail who'd been told by his attorneys that a traffic stop would be catastrophic and had absorbed the lesson. They ran south through Melbourne Beach, through the narrow strip of Barrier Island where the Atlantic was visible to the east and the Indian River Lagoon ran on the west, the road narrowing and the traffic thinning, which required Mike to add distance and accept a longer detection window in exchange for not running a recognizable gap behind Reed on a 2-lane road. Past Sebastian Inlet, the road entered a long rural section, the development giving way to scrub and the occasional fish camp, and Mike dropped back further, just keeping Reed's taillights in sight around the curves, the gray Nissan steady and unhurried. He called Carter on the number Carter had given him, which had seemed like an anonymous line, but answered in 2 rings. "He's south on A1A, Mike said. Melbourne Beach, heading toward Sebastian. Keys' destination looks accurate." "How long behind him?" Carter said. "Quarter mile. Don't lose him through the Vero stretch. Traffic's lighter there." "I know the traffic," Mike said. He drove through the Vero Beach section with the particular focus that sustained surveillance required. Not watching Reed but watching the road, the exits, the patterns that would tell him if Reed had made the tail and was testing it, the way you drove when losing the target for 1 mile was recoverable and losing them for 5 was not. Reed drove straight through Vero without stopping and continued south, past Fort Pierce, past the Stewart turnoff, down through the increasingly quiet stretch of US 1 that ran south of Hobe Sound where the road ran close to the water and the development fell away and the coast was just the coast again. An hour and 40 minutes south of Melbourne, Reed turned off into a waterfront restaurant complex in a small town that had a marina on its lagoon side and a parking lot facing the water. He parked, got out, walked to the restaurant's dockside entrance without looking around. Mike parked on the far end of the lot, backed in, and photographed the gray Nissan's plate with his phone. The restaurant had outdoor seating on the dock, visible from the parking lot with the right angle. Mike found it by walking the lot's perimeter in the direction of a man who'd parked and was looking for somewhere to sit and watch the water, which was a behavior that required no explanation in a waterfront restaurant's parking lot. Reed was at an outdoor table with a man Mike didn't recognize. Late 50s, heavy through the chest, weathered in the specific way of someone who spent sustained time on the water rather than near it. They had drinks, neither of them appearing to be on the first one, and they were leaning in over the table in the compressed posture of 2 people having a conversation they didn't want to carry beyond the table's footprint. Mike photographed them from 60 feet, the phone up at an angle that looked like he was photographing the lagoon, which he partly was. The photographs wouldn't be conclusive at this distance, but would be useful. He wanted the car plate and the meeting documented more than he wanted the faces in detail. He moved to the restaurant's side entrance, a gate in the dock railing that guests used to access the parking lot, and sat on the low wall beside it with his phone as though he was finishing a call. From this position he could see the table clearly, the angle better, the 2 men in 3/4 profile. The conversation ran 12 minutes. Mike stayed at the wall. His ribs had renewed their objection to sitting on concrete surfaces, which he noted and managed. At the 12-minute mark, the other man handed Reed an envelope. Standard white, letter size. Reed put it inside his jacket without looking at it, the practiced motion of someone who'd received envelopes in this manner before and had determined that looking inside them at the table was unnecessary. Then both men finished their drinks and shook hands the way men shook hands when the handshake was functional rather than warm, and the other man walked toward the dock where a boat was tied. A 30-foot center console, white, rigged for offshore fishing with enough outriggers to be credible. Reed walked back to the parking lot. Mike was already around the restaurant's side wall, moving toward his own truck on the lot's far end, before Reed cleared the dock gate. He got in, started the engine, and was positioned to exit the lot before Reed reached his car. He let Reed leave first, gave him 2 minutes, and then photographed the center console at the dock, the registration numbers on the bow, the boat name on the stern, Southern Cross 2. He called Carter. "The meeting's done," Mike said. "The contact runs a boat called the Southern Cross 2, registered numbers." He read them off. The contact handed Reed an envelope. The meeting ran 12 minutes. Location? He gave it. 12 minutes is a delivery meeting, Carter said. Not a planning meeting. The contact delivered something Reed needed to have in person. A pause. The boat registration. Give me 10 minutes. Mike sat in the parking lot and watched the center console idle away from the dock and run south into the lagoon, the man aboard moving with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going and had been going there a long time. His phone buzzed. Torres again. "One more thing," Torres said. "I remembered. When Reed came to the camp 2 years ago, he had a phone conversation in the parking lot before he left. He was speaking in English, but the person he was talking to, I could hear the other voice, not words, but the language wasn't English." "What language?" "Russian," Torres said. "I grew up near the border. I know what Russian sounds like." Mike looked at the water. He called Carter back. "The end user on the export," Mike said. "Eastern European. You said non-NATO aligned state actors." "Potentially," Carter said. Torres, the man from Cobb's camp, heard Reed on a phone call 2 years ago at the Grove. The other party was speaking Russian. 3 seconds of silence. "That upgrades the case category," Carter said. "Significantly." "I assumed it would," Mike said. The boat registration. The Southern Cross 2 is registered to a company called Atlantic Marine Holding Group, which shares a registered agent address in Wilmington, Delaware, with 14 other entities currently under federal examination. Foss's building. Of course, it was Foss's building. Reed built his operation using Foss's administrative infrastructure independently, Mike said. He learned the system from inside the Johnson network and replicated it for his own purposes. "That's our current assessment," Carter said. "The cooperation agreement Foss signed covers entities he built. It does not cover entities built by people who studied his methods." Another pause. The envelope. In Reed's jacket. Whatever's in that envelope. Documents, cash, communications material. It went from a boat registered to a Foss infrastructure entity to a man who is supposed to be within Martin County. He paused. "That's evidence of the broker relationship, the bail violation, and potentially the Russian connection if the contents support it." "I can't get the envelope," Mike said. "No. But the bail violation is documented. You have a photograph of Reed's car at a Brevard County location, time-stamped, and visual documentation of the meeting at a waterfront venue south of his restriction zone." Carter paused. "That's enough for the pretrial supervision officer to revoke bail and take Reed into custody, where the envelope becomes subject to a search warrant." Mike looked at his phone, at the photographs he'd taken. "I'm sending you everything," he said. "The car plate at the Hampton, the arrival here, the meeting documentation, the boat registration." He started uploading. Carter. "Yes. When Reed is in custody. The Russian contact, however that investigation runs, I want to know the outcome, not the classified version." just whether it went somewhere. A pause. I can do that. And the Grove, Mike said. The families at the labor camp. Cobb's departure left a contracting gap. The workers there are agricultural employees. They're not involved in anything Cobb or Griggs were doing, and they need a contract that works. That's not DIA's. I know what it is, Mike said. I'm telling you because you're federal and federal has reach, and Tallman's going to need his labor contracting sorted before the next harvest cycle. And the people doing that labor don't deserve to suffer for what a contractor did without their knowledge. He paused. Noted somewhere that it needs attention. A brief pause. Noted. Mike sent the photographs and drove north. The drive back took longer than the drive down, because the late afternoon put the sunset directly in his eyes through the north-facing windshield for the first 40 minutes, and because his ribs had developed a position that worked, and maintaining that position for 3 hours of driving required a conscious relationship with the steering wheel that was tiring in a way that was separate from the tiredness of the day. Jennings called at 5:30. Reed's bail has been revoked, she said. The pretrial supervision officer received documentation of the Melbourne Hotel and the waterfront meeting. Brevard County Sheriff picked him up 40 minutes ago. A pause. He had an envelope in his jacket. Cash, US dollars, $8,000 and a photograph of a vessel. Appears to be the relay vessel they've been looking for, current anchorage coordinates. He was getting the next transfer location, Mike said. That's what Harris thinks. She paused. The Russian angle. Carter's office called Harris directly, whatever that DIA involvement means for the investigation's jurisdiction. Harris sounded like a man who just had his moderately significant case become significantly more significant. That's accurate, Mike said. How are the ribs? Fine. Mike. They're manageable, he said, which was the more honest version. Go to the doctor. I'll consider it seriously. She made her sound and let it go. Carter's office has the boat registration. They're running the Southern Cross too, through Maritime Intelligence. The contact who handed Reed the envelope is on their radar. She paused. You had a full day. It was a full day, he agreed. He drove north through the darkening coast, the Indian River running alongside, in the stretches where it was visible, brown and quiet in the late light. The same water that ran past Tucker's Marina, and past the Tallman Grove South Dock, and past the boat slip where the flat bottom had been tied for 4 months. All of it the same waterway, all of it connected below the surface, the way Florida's water was always connected below the surface to more water than the visible portion suggested. He stopped in Stewart for gas, and a coffee that was better than it had any right to be, and ate another gas station sandwich because the day had burned through the first one, and the ribs required fuel whether they were willing to acknowledge it or not. Back on US 1 north of Stewart, Donnie called. Thursday charter still on, Donnie said. Birding group, 6 people, 5 a.m. departure. Bringing coffee. You coming? I'm coming, Mike said. Ribs. What about them? Earl told me. Earl tells everybody. Earl tells the right people, Donnie said, which was accurate. You need to move around on a boat. Sitting still makes bruised ribs worse. Mike had no idea whether that was medically accurate, but it had the feel of something Donnie had told himself before and found useful. 5 a.m., Mike said. Dress warm. November on the water's different from November on land. He hung up. The coast highway ran north, through the dark and the marina towns, and the waterfront communities that had been building themselves around this specific stretch of water for 100 years. And somewhere behind him, in a Brevard County facility, Reed was in a holding cell with $8,000 of someone else's cash and a photograph of a boat's current position sitting in an evidence locker, which was exactly where those things belonged. Mike drove the last 40 minutes to Colusa Cay with the radio off. just the road and the dark and the ribs making their moderate case for attention, and pulled into his own driveway at 8:47, which was early enough to be reasonable and late enough to have been a full day. He sat in the truck for a moment before going inside. The background radiation hummed its steady note. Reed in custody. The Russian angle opening. The Wilmington building, connecting one more operation to the same administrative spine. Somewhere in the federal architecture, threads converging on a picture larger than any single summer's work could complete. He let it hum, filed it, left it where it belonged, in the background running its course, moving at federal speed while the waterfront outside his house moved at water speed, which was the speed it had always moved and would keep moving regardless. Inside, he locked the rear door, put the frozen peas on his ribs, and called Jennings one more time. "Reed's in custody," she said before he spoke. "I know. I was calling to tell you to go home." "I am home." "Good." "Mike." "The doctor." "Tomorrow," he said, meaning it this time, which surprised him slightly. "I'll believe it when I hear it from the doctor," she said, and hung up. He went to bed. Slept without difficulty. The ribs woke him once at 3 a.m. with a specific complaint about the sleeping position. He adjusted, they subsided. At 4:45, the alarm went off. He got up, made coffee, dressed for a boat in November, and drove to Port Salerno in the dark. Chapter 8. The Sally Mae moved out of Port Salerno at 5:12, Donnie at the console, the 6 birding clients arranged along the gunnels in the specific configuration of people who'd been on boats before, and knew that the first 10 minutes were for getting settled rather than talking. They wore the gear of serious amateur naturalists, binoculars of varying quality, camera equipment that in 2 cases exceeded anything Mike owned by a considerable margin, field guides in waterproof cases. A retired couple from Michigan, who'd been doing this for 20 years. A woman traveling alone, who'd said exactly 3 words since boarding. 2 men who were clearly friends, clearly competitive about their equipment, clearly going to argue quietly about identification calls all morning. Mike sat in the forward seat, which was not the seat most conducive to rib management on a boat moving through choppy water, but it was the seat that put his back to the clients and his face to the direction of travel, which was the orientation he preferred in confined spaces regardless of what his ribs thought about the chop. The November morning was doing what Carter had promised the weather would do. Clear, 15 knots out of the northeast, which put a small chop on the exposed water but would flatten in the protected sections of the canal. Cold enough for the jacket. Not cold enough to be uncomfortable. Donnie ran the boat with the ease of someone reacquainting himself with something he'd been temporarily separated from, which was what this was. The Sally Mae had been in an impound slip for a week, and Donnie had spent that week on Mike's love seat, and now the boat was moving under Donnie's hands again, and the whole set of his body communicated that this was the correct arrangement of things. "How are the ribs?" Donnie said, not looking at him. "Better than yesterday." "That's not a useful measurement." "It's the one I've got." They cleared the main channel and ran south into the Indian River's protected stretch, the chop diminishing, the water going flat and dark in the early light. Donnie cut the throttle back to a touring speed, and the 6 clients brought their binoculars up almost simultaneously, which was the moment every nature tour boat transformed from transportation into something else. A great blue heron lifted off a mangrove root 40 yards off the port side, wings working the air with the deliberate power of something that had no urgent reason to be anywhere else, and the woman who'd said 3 words since boarding said 3 more. There he is. Mike watched the heron work south along the mangrove line, and thought about nothing in particular, which was the specific utility of a boat in the early morning. The motion and the water, and the scale of the outdoors conspiring to make anything that wasn't immediately in front of you temporarily irrelevant. His phone stayed in his pocket. They reached the Fellsmere Canal arm at 7:15, the section that narrowed and the cypress closed overhead, and the light came through at angles that changed every 100 yards, the whole corridor going from open estuary to something almost enclosed. The clients went quieter, instinctively, because the canal environment seemed to require it the way churches required it, the space itself imposing a behavioral standard. A roseate spoonbill was working the shallows on the east bank 200 yards in. Then 3 more behind it. The Michigan couple made small sounds. The competitive friends stopped competing and simply looked. Mike sat in the forward seat and looked at the spoonbills and thought about how pink they were, which was always the first thought, the specific vivid pink of something that had no reason to be that color, except that it was, evolution having arrived at pink for the roseate spoonbill the same way it arrived at all its decisions, through a process whose logic was internal and impervious to outside commentary. He'd been on this canal before. In Earl's skiff at night, moving without lights toward a dock he needed to see. That had been a different relationship with the same water. Donnie brought the boat to a quiet idle, opposite the spoonbills, and they sat there for 12 minutes while the clients photographed, and the woman who'd said 3 words said nothing more, and the Michigan couple identified 2 additional species in undertones. On the return run, passing the stretch where the Tallman Grove south boundary sat, Mike looked at the bank. The dock was visible from the canal. He hadn't been on the water this direction before, had only approached from the land side, and the water view was different. The dock was more exposed than he'd assumed, visible from 150 yards out, the storage building's roofline above the tree line. Donnie saw him looking. 3 weeks ago, Donnie said, quiet enough that the client's conversations covered it. With the birders. I went past there slower than usual because a limpkin had landed on the dock and the clients wanted a photograph. The limpkin gave you the slow pass. The limpkin gave me the slow pass. Donnie adjusted the throttle. If the limpkin hadn't been on the dock, I'd have gone past at normal speed and probably not looked at the men on the boat long enough to see Griggs's face. Mike thought about the specific randomness of that. A bird that belonged nowhere in particular, choosing a dock as a resting place for 30 seconds, and the chain of events that followed from the slow down it produced. You ever tell that part to Harris? Mike said. The limpkin? Donnie smiled, the first real one Mike had seen from him all week. I told him I slowed to observe wildlife. I left out the specific wildlife. Harris probably doesn't need to know about the limpkin. I felt it would undermine the professional quality of the testimony. They ran the rest of the canal, in the quiet that the canal required, and came back out into the open water of the Indian River as the morning committed fully to its own brightness, the November sun doing its best angle work of the day, low enough to light the water rather than bleach it. Back at the dock in Port Salerno at 9:45, the clients unloading with the particular satisfied energy of people who'd gotten what they came for. The Michigan couple shook Donnie's hand and thanked him in the specific way of people who'd been doing this for 20 years and knew when a guide knew his water. The competitive friends were already arguing about whether the second spoonbill sighting had been a different individual or the same bird repositioned, which would occupy them for the drive home. The woman who'd said 3 words said 4 to Donnie on her way off the boat, same time next month. After they'd gone, Donnie tied off the stern line and didn't say anything for a moment, just stood at the dock with his hand on the cleat. That's what I do, Donnie said finally. That's the whole job. The Michigan couple, the competitive guys, the woman who only talks to spoonbills. He looked at the boat. Somebody tried to take that. With a piece of paper and an anonymous tip, and a legal process that ran on its own momentum once it started. Somebody did, Mike said. You took it back. Harris took it back. Bobby Nash's cameras took it back. You took it back by being exactly what you actually are, which made the frame unsustainable. Mike looked at the dock. I just asked the questions. That's a modest version of the week. It's an accurate one. Donnie coiled a line with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. What happens now? Reed in custody, the export case building, the Russian angle. How does it end? Federal cases end in courtrooms, Mike said. Eventually. After a long time and a lot of paper. He looked at the inlet. What ends for you is the impound. The Sallie Mae is yours, clean, and the charter calendar starts Thursday and runs as long as you want it to. I've got 3 weeks booked, Donnie said. Holiday season's good for birding groups. Snowbirds like something to do in the morning before it gets hot enough to sit by the pool. Good. Mike. Donnie looked at him, the direct look of a man who said what he meant when he meant it. You didn't have to do this. You could have told me it was a legal problem, given me Harris' number, told me to get a lawyer and sort it out. I could have, Mike said. Why didn't you? Mike thought about that. About a backyard cookout in Stewart, 8 months ago, that he'd driven to and back in the same evening because it was easier than explaining why he didn't stay, and about 22 years of ships and shore leave, and the specific kind of friendship that formed between people who'd been in uncomfortable places together and had come out of them. Because you called ahead, Mike said. First time you've ever not called ahead in 30 years. That meant it was bad enough that you forgot the habit. That meant I was going. He picked up his own jacket from the seat. Same reason you would have. Donnie looked at him for a moment, then went back to the lines without making anything more of it. Because that was Donnie, and that was the Navy thing applied correctly. Mike drove back north on US 1 with his phone producing its morning's accumulation of messages in the order they'd arrived, which he worked through at a gas station in Jensen Beach over a coffee that was legitimately good, the kind of gas station that had invested in the coffee equipment, and the result reflected the investment. Harris, Reed in county facility pending federal transfer. Envelope contents processed. 8K cash and anchorage coordinates for relay vessel. Coast Guard has the coordinates. Vessel interdiction in progress offshore. That was the offshore relay vessel. The transfer point they'd been looking for 8 months. Harris again, 10 minutes later, Griggs offering to cooperate. His attorney called at 7 a.m. In exchange for reduced exposure, he's offering full broker identification and communication chain. This combined with Torres's statement and your documentation from Melbourne should produce federal charges on Reed by end of week. Then Jennings, Drummond's office got the Wilmington building connection on the Atlantic Marine Holding Group registration. The connection to Foss's infrastructure is being examined to determine if Reed built independently or with Foss's knowledge despite the cooperation agreement. Foss's attorney called Drummond's office this morning. Then, from an unfamiliar number he'd identified as Carter's operational line, vessel interdiction successful. Relay vessel taken by Coast Guard in international waters south of Miami. Crew of 4 foreign nationals, documentation in process. The vessel's manifest is significant. Call me when you're free. Mike looked at the significant manifest's message and decided that Carter's definition of significant and his own were probably running parallel, and that calling Carter from a gas station in Jensen Beach was the appropriate response. Carter answered in one ring. The manifest, Mike said. The relay vessel was carrying inbound as well as outbound, Carter said. Outbound was the hardware, consistent with 12 prior shipments, same equipment profile. Inbound, a pause. Inbound was cash. US dollars, bearer, negotiable instruments, and a package of documentation that our technical team is working through. Documentation for what? Initial assessment suggests shipping contracts, registration documents for vessels, and what appears to be a client account structure for the next phase of the export operation. Carter paused. The documentation includes a property acquisition list. Florida coastal properties, 12 parcels acquired over the last 18 months through shell entities. Mike set his coffee down. Property acquisitions, he said. Waterfront parcels, all of them. Indian River corridor primarily, with 2 in the Martin County Inlet area. Carter paused. The acquisition entities use a Wilmington registered agent. Foss's building. Different suite. Same building. Carter let that sit for a moment. Reed wasn't just running the export operation. He was running a parallel land acquisition alongside it. The export proceeds, the cash coming back on the relay vessel, were being converted into Florida waterfront property through the same shell architecture he learned from Foss. Mike looked at the US 1 traffic running past the gas station, the steady flow of ordinary Florida commerce. Another land bank. Not Johnson's. Reed's. Built from arms export proceeds, using Foss's infrastructure template, aimed at the same waterfront corridor that Johnson's operation had been developing before the federal case shut it down. Reed identified the corridor from inside the Johnson network, Mike said. He knew which waterfront parcels Johnson had targeted. When the Johnson operation collapsed, he built his own parallel acquisition using the same corridor. Picking up where Johnson left off, Carter said. With export proceeds rather than PAC money. Different funding source, same real estate target. The Deepwater Channel expansion, Mike said. The Congressional Infrastructure Project. The value driver is the same, Carter said. Johnson used advanced congressional knowledge to identify the parcels. Reed used the existing acquisition model. He didn't need the congressional access once he knew which parcels were targeted. A pause. He's been acquiring the parcels Johnson couldn't get before the federal case froze the land bank. Mike looked at the Indian River, visible from the gas station's south side through a gap in the commercial strip, brown and moving south the way it always moved south. 12 parcels. The same corridor. A different man. A different funding mechanism, the same geography. The acquisitions, Mike said. They're frozen now. With Reed in custody. Asset seizure order is being prepared, Carter said. The properties go into federal forfeiture, along with the export proceeds and the relay vessel. And the families displaced by the first Patriot process in this corridor. The restitution administrator. Does the Reed acquisition forfeiture add to the restitution pool? A pause. That's a question for DOJ's Assets Forfeiture Unit. I can note it. Note it, Mike said. He ended the call and sat with the coffee, which had cooled past its best temperature while Carter was talking, and thought about a man who'd spent 6 years learning the administrative architecture of a congressional corruption scheme, and had used that knowledge to build his own parallel operation when the original scheme came apart. The machine didn't stop. It adapted. It found new operators and new funding and new mechanisms that fit the same geographic targets. Reed had been the broker. He'd been running arms through the Tolman Grove and converting the proceeds into waterfront property while simultaneously working as a political consultant for the Johnson network, all of it running on Foss's template, all of it aimed at the same stretch of Indian River Lagoon. He called Jennings. The relay vessel, he said. The manifest. Reed was acquiring Florida waterfront parcels with the export proceeds. 12 parcels, Indian River corridor. Same targets as Johnson's land bank. Jennings was quiet for 2 full seconds, which was a long time for Jennings. He was completing what Johnson started, she said. While working for Johnson. 2 operations running simultaneously. The same geography, coordinated or parallel, I don't know yet, but either way aimed at the same outcome. The Congressional Infrastructure Vote, Jennings said. The Deepwater Channel expansion. Johnson's land bank was going to benefit from it. Now Reed's acquisition, it would have benefited from the same vote. 12 parcels acquired from export proceeds held through Foss's shell architecture, positioned to appreciate dramatically when the congressional vote pushed through the expansion. He paused. Reed didn't just work for Johnson. He built his own position alongside Johnson's, using Johnson's connections to identify the targets and Johnson's infrastructure to acquire them. He was running both sides of the same play, Jennings said. Running it and insulating himself from it. If Johnson fell, which he did, Reed's operation was structured to survive it. Different funding, different acquisition entities, nominally separate from the Johnson network, even though it used the same template. Until Torres saw him at the Grove 2 years ago, Jennings said. And Donnie Frears saw Griggs at the dock. And Anna Medina photographed a delivery. And a limpkin landed on the dock, Mike said. What? Nothing. Point is, the whole thing came apart from the ground level. Not from the federal investigation. From a birding tour, and a 17-year-old who photographed something because she thought it was wrong. Jennings was quiet a moment. That's always how it comes apart, isn't it? Always, Mike said. Which is why they spend so much effort making sure the ground level doesn't notice. He drove north, the Indian River running alongside in the places where it ran alongside, and reached Colusa Cay at noon. Earl was at the fuel dock. The Perseverance was in its slip. The bait shop was doing the Wednesday lunchtime business that bait shops on the Treasure Coast did. The combination of fishermen and tourists that kept these places viable in the in-between months. He sat on the bench at the dock's landward end, where he'd sat for a lot of significant conversations over the last several months. The wood worn smooth, in the way wood got smooth from sustained use, and ate the second half of the gas station sandwich he'd pocketed in Jensen Beach. His phone buzzed. Anna Medina. Not a call, a text. A photograph. Anna and Rosa at the lunch counter on 512, Rosa behind the register. Anna at the stool, both of them looking at the camera with the specific, relaxed expression of two people in a space they belonged in. The radio was visible in the background. The same radio that had been playing something with brass when Mike had walked in that morning. Below the photograph, one line, "She made me eggs." He looked at the photograph for a moment. Typed back, "How are the wrists?" Anna, "Fine. I have strong wrists." Luis says hi. Then, "He told me you said go look for her with everything I have." Rosa told me that's what you said. Then, "Thank you for having everything." Mike put the phone in his pocket. Earl appeared at the bench end, coffee in hand, the gravitational inevitability of Earl Tucker being somewhere useful at the right moment. "Boat run go well?" Earl said. 6 happy birders. 3 spoonbills. Donnie's back in business. Good. Earl drank his coffee. "You look like a man who's finished something." "Finished the chapter," Mike said. "The book's still running." "Books usually are," Earl said. He looked at the inlet, the water moving through it with its usual indifference to the events that had been occurring in its vicinity. "You going to take a few days before the next thing?" Mike thought about that. About the beach in the morning with the detector, the tide pulling back the sand shelf, the specific quiet of a low-tide morning with no appointment attached to it. "Maybe a week," he said. "Good." Earl finished his coffee. "Rib's going to let you run the beach?" "Tomorrow, I'll find out." "Go to the doctor today." "Earl." "Mike." Earl looked at him with the expression he used when he decided something was the end of a conversation rather than the middle of one. "The doctor. Today. The beach is there tomorrow." Mike looked at the inlet. "Today," he said. Earl went back to the fuel dock. Mike sat on the bench for another few minutes, the November noon doing its best work, the light right, the air right, the water moving the way the water moved when nobody was asking anything of it. He got up and went to find a doctor. Chapter 9. The doctor's office smelled like antiseptic, and the specific, resigned patience of a waiting room that had been full since 8 a.m. and wasn't going to empty before 5. Mike sat in a plastic chair for 40 minutes, next to a man with a bandaged thumb, who was reading a magazine from 2019, and a teenager who was watching something on her phone with one earbud in, and the expression of someone enduring the wait by refusing to acknowledge it. When the doctor came in, she was 30-something, efficient, and looked at the X-ray with the assessment of someone who'd seen this before. 2 bruised, 1 cracked, she said. The cracked one is the 3rd floating rib on the left. It'll hurt for 3 weeks and then it'll stop hurting. There's nothing I do differently for a cracked floating rib versus bruised ribs except tell you to stop doing whatever you were doing. I'll take that under advisement, Mike said. That means you're not going to stop. It means I'll think about it. She gave him anti-inflammatory medication, instructions about activity modification that he read carefully and intended to follow approximately, and a follow-up appointment he'd probably not keep. He paid the co-pay from a wallet that was thinner than he'd like and drove to the marina. Earl was closing up the bait shop when Mike pulled in, the late afternoon light going orange in the way it went orange in November when the angle was right. Earl looked at him, looked at the prescription bag, and nodded once. Good, Earl said. 2 bruised, 1 cracked. What did she say about activity? Modification. You going to modify? I'm going to try. Earl picked up the bait shop's key ring. Pat came by at 3. He's got a salvage job up near the Vero Inlet. Nothing federal, private hire. A boat owner lost an outboard motor off the stern 2 weeks ago. Good money for half a day's work. He looked at the water. He's in a good place. He should be, Mike said. He did everything right. He kept the permit. He ran the job clean. He got the evidence into the chain correctly. Whatever happened after that wasn't his problem to solve. Some people would have gone in themselves, Earl said. Without the permit, without the federal agent, just gone in and pulled what they found. And contaminated the evidence chain, and given Reed's defense attorneys a point of attack. Mike looked at the inlet. Pat's smart enough to know the difference between finding something and doing something with it properly. 30 years on this water teaches a man the difference, Earl said. He locked the bait shop and pocketed the keys. Donnie called. Thursday charter is a full boat again. He's already got 2 weeks of December booked. Word travels. Word travels in the charter fishing community faster than anywhere I know. Earl started toward the office trailer, then stopped. One more thing. Woman came by at 2. Looking for you. Said she'd come back tomorrow morning. Mike looked at him. Description. Dark hair. Blazer. Moved like she knew where she was going before she got there. Earl looked at the trailer. She knew your name. Said she was an old colleague. Jenny Baker. Not called ahead. Not texted, just appeared at the marina, which was the Jenny Baker version of calling ahead when she'd decided calling ahead was insufficient. She say when tomorrow, Mike said. 8 a.m. He ate dinner at Gus's that evening. A real dinner rather than a gas station approximation. The snapper that the cook had done well, and that Patty Sutton delivered without ceremony. Dewey was at his stool, working through the state football playoff bracket with the systematic attention of a man who developed opinions about every team in the classification and intended to share them. Tyler Brooks, Dewey said when Mike sat down. State championship Friday. The opposing quarterback throws right on a 3-step drop, average velocity, average touch. Tyler throws left on a 5-step drop with better placement than his mechanics suggest. He looked at the bracket printout. Tyler's defense needs to shade right on every possession, and his offense needs to control the clock through the second quarter when the opposing defense historically shows fatigue. You've watched a lot of film, Mike said. I've read a lot of statistics, Dewey said. It's not film, it's inference. Film you need access to. Statistics are public. What's your prediction? Regional wins by 10. Tyler throws for 260, 2 touchdowns, no picks. One of the touchdowns is a scramble play where he extends the pocket further than his coach wants him to. Dewey circled something on the bracket. His coach is going to have opinions about that scramble play, and Tyler is going to listen patiently and do it again the next time the situation calls for it. That's a very specific prediction. Specific predictions are the only useful kind, Dewey said. General predictions are just weather forecasting without the radar. Gus set a Modelo down at Mike's spot, no lime, the settled habit of 2 years. Mike drank it and listened to Dewey work through the other bracket matchups with the focused pleasure of a man engaged in his primary vocation, and let the bar do what Gus's bar did in the evenings, which was be itself without requiring anything of the people in it. His phone buzzed once. Harris. Griggs' cooperation agreement signed this afternoon. He gave us the full broker communication chain. Reed used encrypted messaging app, but Griggs saved screenshots of 4 exchanges. Combined with Torres's statement and Melbourne documentation, we file on Reed Monday. Mike read the text, put the phone away, finished the Modelo. Patty came by with a second one he hadn't asked for. You look like a man who had a week, she said. I had a week, he said. Good week or bad week? He thought about Donnie's boat, moving out of the inlet at 5:12 in the morning with 6 birding clients and 3 roseate spoonbills and a limpkin that had been in the right place at the right time. About Anna Medina's text, she made me eggs, and the photograph of mother and daughter at the lunch counter on 512. Good week, he said. Patty nodded and moved on, because at Gus's bar, a good week was sufficient information and didn't require elaboration. Jenny Baker arrived at Tucker's Marina at 7:58, which was the 2 minutes early of someone who'd said 8 and meant 8 but couldn't quite bring herself to be late. She was in jeans and a jacket rather than the blazer she'd worn to every previous version of this kind of meeting, which was either weather-appropriate pragmatism or a signal that this wasn't the kind of meeting that required the blazer, and Mike's red was the latter. She looked at the marina the way she looked at most things, taking a full inventory before committing to a response. The Perseverance in its slip, the bait shop, Earl's office trailer, the inlet running behind it all. Gus's bar has a Marlin sign, she said. It does. I drove past it on the way in. It's crooked, Mike said. I noticed. She looked at the inlet. This is a good place. It works for me. They walked the dock because the dock was the right place for this kind of conversation. Moving, outdoors. The water providing the ambient sound that made a conversation feel less formal than a room. His ribs noted the walking, and he noted the notation and kept walking. The Dia man, she said. Carter. You know him. I know of him. He's been working the export investigation for 14 months from the intelligence side. He's good. She looked at a pelican on the channel marker, which looked back with the indifference of something that had been sitting on that marker since before either of them arrived. He came to me before he came to you. Mike looked at her. 2 weeks ago, she said. He knew I was in Vero Beach. He knew I'd been building the financial documentation on the Johnson network. He asked whether the export operation and the land bank were connected. She paused. I told him what I knew, which was that the Wilmington building was the connection point, but that I couldn't determine whether Reed built independently or with Johnson's knowledge. He thanked me and left. Then he came to me. Then he came to you, because I can document the financial architecture, and you can sit outside a Hampton Inn and watch a man get in a car and drive to a waterfront restaurant in Brevard County. She looked at the water. We're complementary assets, apparently. Apparently. I don't love being an asset. You built 32 pages of wire transfer documentation alone in a hotel room for 4 months, Mike said. You were already an asset. Carter just acknowledged it, officially. She almost smiled at that. The 12 parcels Reed was acquiring. The export proceeds going into Florida waterfront property. Federal forfeiture, Mike said. Into the restitution pool, alongside the Johnson Land Bank seizures. Drummond's working on aggregating them. The Johnson parcels and the Reed parcels represent most of the Southern Lagoon Corridor acquisition footprint. Combined forfeiture gives the restitution administrator a pool large enough to meaningfully address what First Patriot took from those communities. She paused. Not the houses. The houses are gone. But the equity value, the displacement damages, she stopped. It's not enough. It's what there is. It's what there is, Mike confirmed. They walked to the dock's end and stopped. The inlet was running an outgoing tide, the water moving faster than it moved its slack, and across the inlet the far bank had the morning's particular quality of light that November produced when it was trying. I'm staying in Vero Beach, Jenny said. Not the hotel. I found a place to rent month to month on the lagoon side. She looked at the water. I've been working on rebuilding the firm. Different clients, different screening process, a protocol for what I'm willing to take and what I'm not. She paused. Drummond's office has an informal arrangement with me. I do documentation work on financial architectures when they need ground-level analysis that their forensic accountants aren't positioned to do quickly. It's not a formal contract. It's a working relationship. That suits you, Mike said. Working relationship without a formal contract. It suits me, she agreed. It also suits me to be 2 hours from here. She said it looking at the water rather than at him, the way certain things were easier to say to water than to a person. Mike looked at the inlet. There'll be more of this, he said. Not the Johnson thread, specifically. The larger thing. New operators using existing architecture. New operations in familiar geography. There'll be more, she said. There's always more. That's not pessimism, it's how machines work. They don't stop running because one gear breaks. They find a different gear. She paused. The difference now is that the financial documentation exists. Foss's cooperation built a paper record of the administrative architecture. Every new operation that uses that architecture leaves fingerprints that match a known pattern. We'll see them faster. We'll see them faster. She looked at him. The broker. Reed. Carter says the Russian connection is significant. Carter says a lot of things carefully. He does. But significant, in DIA vocabulary, means the export operation connected to something upstream of Reed that Reed himself may not have fully understood. She looked at the inlet. That's a different case. A federal case, a classified case, not the kind of thing that gets resolved at a marina dock. No, Mike said. That one's not yours. No. He looked at the water. Mine was the charter boat captain, and the missing girl and the labor camp. That was mine. And you finished it. Finished that chapter, he said, and then noticed he'd said the same thing to Earl the previous evening, which was either a recurring thought or a habit forming, and decided it was a thought rather than a habit because habits were less intentional. Donnie, Jenny said. Tell me about Donnie. He told her. The charter that morning, the spoonbills, the canal, the limpkin, and its accidental role in producing the identification. She listened the way she always listened, completely without commenting until he was done. The limpkin, she said. The limpkin. An arms export operation that ran for 18 months on a sophisticated operational framework was exposed because a bird landed on a dock. She looked at the pelican on the channel marker. There's a version of this story where that doesn't happen, where the limpkin doesn't land, and Donnie goes past at speed and Griggs stays anonymous. There's a version, Mike said. There's also a version where Anna Medina doesn't go to the south end of the grove that night. Where she doesn't have her phone. Where she doesn't photograph anything. The contingency version, Jenny said. Everything runs on contingency, Mike said. The operations we find, the ones we don't find, all of it. Which things get noticed, and which things run clean, depends on a limpkin landing on a dock, or a 17-year-old being curious about metal cases. He paused. The job is to be the kind of person that a limpkin landing on a dock can produce a result for. The rest is what it is. Jenny looked at the channel marker. The pelican on it had been joined by a second pelican, both of them looking south with the expressions of creatures that had committed to this position and intended to hold it until the position stopped being useful. I came to say something, she said. Mike waited. When the firm fell apart. When I understood what I'd been part of. I came to the Treasure Coast because it was the place I could work the problem. The wire transfers, the land bank, the architecture. She looked at the water. I told myself it was purely operational. The location was practical. The Florida records were here, the entities were here. I could pull county filings in person. She stopped. That was partly true. Partly, Mike said. You were here, she said. It came out plainly, without performance. The way she said things when she decided they needed to be said rather than managed. That was also part of it. The inlet moved its tide south. The pelicans held their position. Earl's office trailer had its light on. I know, Mike said. She looked at him. That's it. I know. I've known since you texted your own name to the burner phone at 5:53 in the morning. He looked at the water. I've been here. She was quiet for a moment. Then, the rented place in Vero Beach. It has a second bedroom. I have a house, Mike said. With a carport and a Folgers can full of rusted belt buckles. I know you have a house. She looked at him. I'm telling you, the rented place has a second bedroom. In case you needed somewhere to be when you're in Vero Beach. I'm in Vero Beach occasionally, he said. I know you are. They stood at the dock's end and let that sit where it sat, the water doing its morning business around them, neither of them reaching for the next sentence because the next sentence wasn't required. Earl came out of the office trailer and walked the dock toward them, with the unhurried gait of a man who had something to deliver and had waited for the right moment to deliver it. Coffee, Earl said, holding out 2 mugs. Made a fresh pot. He handed them over and walked back to the trailer without another word, which was Earl Tucker at his best, knowing what a moment needed and providing it without making anything more of it. Mike drank the coffee, which was better than the gas station version had any right to aspire to. Jenny drank hers and looked at the inlet. Friday, she said. State championship game. Tyler Brooks. Dewey predicts regional by 10. Is Dewey usually right? Dewey is right about football, with the specific consistency of someone who's been wrong enough times to have developed a genuinely calibrated methodology. He drank. We should go. I'd like that, she said. The pelicans on the channel marker lifted off together, wings working in the cold November air, and went south over the inlet with the patient authority of something that knew exactly where it was going and had been going there for a long time. Chapter 10. Friday arrived with the specific confidence of a Florida day that had decided what it was going to be and had no interest in revision. Clear, 58 degrees. The kind of cold that was relative rather than absolute. The kind that made native Floridians wear their heaviest jackets while people from Michigan walked around in light sweaters and found the whole thing charming. Mike picked Jenny up at her Vero Beach rental at 2, and she came out of the door at 1:58 with a jacket and a coffee thermos, and the look of someone who'd been ready for 10 minutes and had been waiting out the remaining time rather than rushing the pickup. The rental was a small house on the lagoon's west side, 1960s construction, the kind of building that had survived several hurricanes by being low and concrete and not asking too much of the wind. A kayak was already tied to the dock. She'd been there 3 weeks. "You got a kayak," Mike said. "It came with the house." "The landlord's." "You been out in it?" "Twice." "The lagoon's different from the canal side." She got in, settled the thermos between the seats. "Quieter." He drove north on A1A, the Atlantic visible to the east in the bright afternoon light, and they talked about things that weren't the case. The house, the kayak, the specific quality of Treasure Coast November versus the November of other places she'd lived, which included Atlanta and Washington, and 2 years in a rental in Amsterdam that she described as damp in a way that had never left her coat. He told her about Earl's assessment of the coffee he'd started making since the good pot in the office trailer finally gave out, which was that the new pot was technically superior but lacked character, which was Earl Tucker's view on most improvements. She laughed at that, a real one, the kind that didn't happen in professional contexts. They took US 1 into Sebastian and found the high school stadium by following the traffic pattern of a Friday night playoff game. The line of cars, the people walking in parkas they didn't need, the particular festive compression of a community event that had become significant enough to draw people from outside the community. Dewey Pruitt was already in the stands when they got there, 3rd row up on the home side, having apparently arrived early enough to establish a position and hold it. He'd saved 2 seats beside him, using the method of sitting large and making deliberate eye contact with anyone who looked interested in the row. He looked at Jenny when they sat. "Jenny Baker," Dewey said. "I know who you are." "I know who you are too," Jenny said. "You predicted Tyler throws for 260 with 1 scramble touchdown." Dewey looked at Mike. "You told her." She asked about your prediction. "I stand by the prediction." Dewey looked back at the field, where Regional was finishing warm-ups. "The scramble will happen in the 3rd quarter, when the strong safety overplays the run. Tyler will see the gap before his legs know they're going to use it. You can tell by the way his head comes up just before he moves." Jenny looked at the field. "How many of his games have you watched?" "All of them this season. 3 from last season. 2 from his sophomore year, when he was still figuring out the pocket." Dewey picked up his program. "He's ready. You can tell when a player is ready, not confident ready. Confidence is about the player. Ready is about the game." Ray Brooks was in his spot. 3rd row, center section, the same seat he'd occupied every game since he'd come back. He had a regional championship banner folded on his lap that he'd apparently been carrying in and unfolding in the exact same way each game, the superstition of a man who'd found the right ritual at the right time and intended to preserve it. Tyler Brooks ran out for warm-ups, and Ray's face did nothing dramatic, just tracked his nephew from the tunnel to the field with the focused attention of a man watching something that mattered. The game went the way Dewey had predicted it would go, and also didn't, which was the thing about specific predictions. They were right about the shape and wrong about the sequence. Tyler threw for 283 yards, which was 23 more than Dewey predicted, and produced from Dewey a response of calm vindication rather than adjustment, on the grounds that 260 was the lower bound of his estimate, and everything above it was within the acceptable range of a successful prediction. The scramble touchdown came in the 2nd quarter, not the 3rd, which Dewey acknowledged with a small nod, and noted that 2nd and 3rd were adjacent quarters, and the underlying red on the safety's overplay had been correct, only the timing had been approximate. Regional won by 14, which was 4 more than Dewey predicted, and Dewey accepted this as evidence that the opposing defense had been slightly worse than his statistical model anticipated, which was a matter of available data rather than analytical error. Jenny watched the game with genuine attention rather than performed interest, which Mike noticed and didn't comment on. She asked Dewey 2 questions during the third quarter, both technical, both about the defensive coverage scheme, and Dewey answered them with the specific satisfaction of someone who'd been asked the right questions by someone who actually wanted the answer. Ray Brooks was on his feet for the scramble touchdown. Not jumping, not making noise, just standing, both hands at his sides, watching the kid cross the goal line. At the final whistle, regional sideline erupted in the way sidelines erupted when something that had been worked toward for a season resolved into a scoreboard number, and Tyler Brooks got mobbed by offensive linemen who were considerably larger than him and seemed to view this as appropriate rather than dangerous. In the stands, Ray Brooks sat back down and refolded the championship banner on his lap with careful hands. After the game, Mike found Dan Cooper in the concession line, which was where Cooper apparently went after game, deciding plays to process them, in proximity to nachos. "Good game," Cooper said. "Good game," Mike agreed. "Anything new on the federal side?" "Reed's being transferred to Miami federal custody Monday. Harris filed the charges Thursday afternoon. The full package: ETAR violations, conspiracy, the bail violation, the Melbourne meeting documentation." Cooper looked at his nachos when they arrived. "The Russian angle is classified but active, from what I hear." Carter's office. "Dia. They're not sharing much." Cooper pulled a napkin from the dispenser. "The 12 land bank parcels Reed was acquiring, the federal forfeiture order went through yesterday. Drummond's restitution administrator is combining them with the Johnson parcel forfeiture into one pool." He paused. "Laura Scott's case specifically. The administrator called me Wednesday. Based on the combined pool size, there's sufficient value to fund full equity restitution for every First Patriot case in St. Lucie and Indian River counties, plus estimated displacement damages." "All of them," Mike said. "All of them. Takes time to process, 12 to 18 months for final distributions. But the pool is there." He looked at the nachos, apparently deciding they'd cooled sufficiently. "Dot Williams called me. She said to tell you she's already planted tomatoes in the space where the First Patriot letter used to sit in her kitchen drawer." Mike thought about an 80-year-old woman planting tomatoes in November as a specific form of conclusion. "Tell her I said the tomatoes will come in fine," he said. Cooper ate a nacho. "You doing okay? Heard about the ribs?" "Cracked one. Doctor says 3 weeks." "You going to listen to the doctor for 3 weeks?" "I'm going to listen to the doctor for the amount of time the ribs make it advisable to listen to the doctor," Mike said, which was the honest version. Cooper shook his head. "You and Harris should compare notes. Harris says Reed's cooperation agreement is already showing cracks. Reed's attorneys are trying to limit the scope, specifically around the Russian communications. Harris thinks it goes to trial." "Trials are Harris' problem now," Mike said. "They are." Cooper looked at the field, where Tyler Brooks was doing a post-game interview with a local sports reporter, who appeared faintly overwhelmed by the assignment. "Kid's going to do something at FSU. Dewey predicted it 18 months ago," Mike said. "Dewey predicts everything 18 months ago. And he's right about 70% of the time, which is a better rate than most people who get paid to predict things." Cooper finished his nachos, disposed of the tray with the efficiency of a man who cleaned up after himself without making a production of it, and shook Mike's hand. "Good work this month," Cooper said. "Donnie's boat back in the water. The girl home. The export operation collapsed." He paused. "The other stuff, the federal cases, the land banks, the Russian angle, that's all going somewhere that doesn't need you to push it anymore." "I know," Mike said. "Doesn't that feel strange?" Mike thought about the beach in the morning. The metal detector on its hook. 3 weeks of modified activity, as the cracked rib decided whether to honor the doctor's timeline or its own. It feels like the right time to go find some buckles, he said. Cooper looked at him, decided this was the accurate version of something rather than the evasive version, and nodded. State record for a Spanish 8-reel is something like $40,000, Cooper said. I looked it up after you told Dewey about the detector. The beach gives up pull tabs and fishing weights, Mike said. Occasionally a wedding ring. But once in a while. Once in a while, Mike agreed. Gus's bar at 9:30 on a state championship Friday ran at a volume it didn't usually reach, the playoff result having produced a specific communal warmth that the bar absorbed the way Gus's bar absorbed most things, completely without changing its essential nature, just running a slightly higher version of what it always was. Dewey held court at his stool. He'd been here since 8, having left the stadium before the crowd and arrived at the bar before the crowd, and was currently in the middle of a detailed breakdown of the game for Bobby Meade from the dry cleaner who'd watched it on television, and kept asking questions that revealed he'd been watching football casually rather than with attention, which Dewey was patiently addressing. Mike and Jenny came in at 9:30 and took 2 stools down from Dewey, and Gus put a Modelo down without the lime, and looked at Jenny with the assessment of a man who ran a bar and had developed opinions about who belonged in it. Coffee or beer? Gus said to her. Coffee, Jenny said. Real if you have it. I have real, Gus said, and got it. Dewey looked down the bar when the noise permitted. The scramble was the second quarter. I noticed, Jenny said. The read was correct. The timing was approximate. The timing was approximate, she agreed. The read was correct. Dewey looked at Mike with the expression of a man who'd been vindicated in a way that improved the evening's quality, then returned to Bobby Meade's questions about the zone coverage breakdown in the fourth quarter. Mike drank his Modelo and looked at the Marlin sign above the door, the same crooked angle it had always hung at. The paint faded to the specific shade that came from 30 Florida summers, and the intention to repaint it having never quite materialized into an action. Patty Sutton delivered a basket of conch fritters to the bar without being asked, because Patty Sutton knew when a Friday night warranted fritters and acted accordingly. These are good, Jenny said after the first one. Gus's cook has been making them the same way for 10 years, Mike said. He's never told anyone the recipe, and Gus has never asked because asking would imply it might change. Reasonable policy, Jenny said. They sat with their drinks and the fritters, and the bar running its championship Friday around them, and Mike let it be what it was without reaching for anything beyond it. The case was in federal hands. The local pieces were resolved. Reed was in custody, and Griggs was cooperating, and Torres had given his statement, and Anna Medina was planting herself back in her own life at a lunch counter on 512 where the radio played something with brass. His phone buzzed once. He looked at it. A text from Harris, Coast Guard interdicted relay vessel's secondary contact tonight. Second vessel, same operation, taken 40 miles offshore. Found communications equipment that links directly to the foreign end user. Carter's office is very busy. He showed it to Jenny, who read it and handed the phone back. Carter's going to be busy for a while, she said. Carter's going to be busy for a long while, Mike agreed, and put the phone away, because Carter's busy was Carter's busy and the fritters were getting cold. Dewey finished his breakdown for Bobby Meade, who thanked him with the sincerity of a man who now understood the fourth quarter zone coverage better than he'd ever expected to understand any fourth quarter zone coverage, and turned back to his own drink. Ramble, Dewey said. Yeah. The beach tomorrow. What about it? Tide's going out at 6:15. Low tide at 7:50. 2 hours of good shelf. Dewey picked up his beer. Your ribs will object. My ribs have been objecting all week. Your ribs are right to object, Dewey said. But you're going anyway. I'm going anyway, Mike said. Good. Dewey finished his beer, set the glass down. There's something out there. I feel it. Mike looked at him. You don't feel tides. I feel patterns. Dewey shrugged, with the equanimity of a man who'd been right about things enough times to be comfortable with the confidence. The shelf has been building for 2 weeks. Something interesting comes up in a building shelf. He looked at his empty glass. Might be nothing. Might be a pull tab. Might be something worth driving to Tallahassee about. Mike looked at the Marlin sign. Pull tabs don't require driving to Tallahassee, he said. No, Dewey said. They don't. He pushed his glass toward the bar's edge for Gus, who took it without comment. But you're going out anyway. I'm going out anyway, Mike said. 6:15, Dewey said. Before it gets complicated. Jenny was looking at the Marlin sign too. At the crooked angle of it, the faded paint, the 30 Florida summers it had absorbed without revision. I'll come, she said. Mike looked at her. The beach at 6:15, she said. I haven't been on that beach yet. She picked up her coffee. I've been 2 hours south for 3 months. I should see the beach. It's a beach, Mike said. It has sand and water. And a man with a metal detector, she said. At 6:15. Before it gets complicated. Gus came by with the rag, running his circuit of the bar, the same circuit he'd been running for as long as Mike had been coming here, and refilled Jenny's coffee without being asked. Good game tonight, Gus said, to no one in particular, which was Gus's way of saying it to everyone in the room. Good game, Dewey confirmed. Kid something, Gus said. Kid something, Mike said. The bar ran its Friday night around them, warm and loud at its own modest level. And outside the Marlin sign hung at its angle in the November dark, and tomorrow the tide would go out at 6:15, and the beach would give up whatever it had, and the morning after that, and the morning after that, and whatever complications arrived with them would arrive with them, and be dealt with by the people equipped to deal with them, which included a retired intelligence officer with a cracked rib and a metal detector, and a woman from a rented house on the lagoon, who'd started keeping a kayak on the dock. The fritters finished. Mike ordered more, because Patty had been right to bring them in the first place, and there was no reason to let the evening end before the evening was ready to end. Dewey put a new scratch-off on the bar and picked up his key. The Marlin sign hung where it hung. The end. Close quarters. Fog of war. Cost of war. Stories of war. Sound of war. Hunter's game. Wet work. Low tide. Closing time. At large. The fix. Salvage.